Wow, that was as if by magic. I appear on stage, the elevator music goes off, and everyone is looking incredibly fresh this morning. So before I start, I really want to thank Niels and Nicholas again. I spoke to many people last night. Many people were saying that the venue that we had last night was the best conference dinner location we've ever had at a GA. So huge kudos to the organising team. It's very impressive. And for those of you who are only joining day 3 of our programme, we've had a fantastic couple of days covering a whole range of different subjects on the 3 themes of the conference. And this has really been a fascinating update, both from C3S and the C3S family of, how we're using AI and ML to improve resolution, to improve, how we're doing things. We've seen some incredibly exciting data visualizations and reprocessing of data, and we've had some great discussions in the coffee breaks as well. I'm going to flag now in case I forget at the end. We also have over 70 posters that will be awarded at some point today. So I really encourage everyone to have a read of the posters, vote for the posters, because a huge amount of work has gone into them, and that's also a core part of the conference. So we are missing a speaker as well today, so that gives us a bit more time for questions. So I'll take a question or two after each speaker, and then if we have more time at the end, we'll open it up for further discussion, and we'll see how the timing goes. We've had to start a little bit late to make sure we had more people trickle into the room. So I'm delighted to welcome Joanna Nalo. She has travelled from Australia. She's at Griffith University, and I very much look forward to your presentation. And the clicker's on stage. Sorry? The clicker's there.
All right, good morning. All right, so I'm Associate Professor Johanna Nala, and I'm also a coordinating lead author for the IPCC for Working Group 2 on Chapter 4 that looks at future climate adaptation options. However, today what I'm presenting is not the official stand of the IPCC, but rather personal reflections. And I did not go out last night, so I should be fine. So in terms of climate adaptation community and Earth observations community. So we had an interesting workshop last December where we were trying to find out what were the connections between these communities. And throughout the workshop, it was really interesting because a lot of the Earth observations community said to us and said, well, okay, so what data do you need? And we said, well, what data do you have? And they said, no, what do you actually need? And we said, well, we don't know what you have. So, and I think it's an interesting conversation, and following the conference yesterday as well, trying to make those connections. What data is there, but also what does the adaptation community need? And I don't have answers to that yet. So what I thought I'd do with this talk is to talk a bit more in terms of, well, what are the actual problems that adaptation professionals are trying to solve? And maybe that can help us also to have that conversation in terms of where are the connections also with Earth observations, data and science. So while we do have a big focus on the biophysical hazards, obviously from climate change, there are a whole heap of other things that the adaptation community is looking at when we talk about climate adaptation. So we look at data for health and well-being, infrastructure and systems. We also obviously look at resource and risk and exposure, so multi-hazard risk assessments, ecosystems exposure as well, different types of socioeconomic data, governance and policies, so national climate adaptation plans and policies, for instance, and policies and plans at different levels, And also knowledge and culture, and that's something that's really often not easily put into a data-ready format. So we are, for instance, looking at indigenous knowledge and local knowledge, and how does that support more effective climate adaptation decision-making. We also look at cultural heritage, social capital, education, and even there's research emerging on spiritual values and the relationship with climate adaptation. So it's very much beyond the biophysical, which probably explains the, what data you have, what data do you need. So the types of questions that we are interested in the adaptation community is relating to reducing vulnerability. So we are interested in, if the action reduces exposure, so if it's reducing frequency or magnitude of one of the climate impacts, and how does that translate to the person, populations, or research that we look at. Also sensitivity, so if we do implement these adaptation options, does it actually make the climate impacts less problematic? And also we look at adaptive capacity, which is a very big concept, and with some research saying there's like hundreds of different components of adaptive capacity as well. So does the action increase the ability of people to actually identify opportunities and challenges created by climate variability, and what can they actually then do about those? And a lot of our work focuses on trying to understand different types of climate adaptation options. So we have different categorizations, obviously, but these are some of the more prevalent that we are finding in the literature. So looking at some of the nature-based and ecosystem-based adaptation, infrastructural, economic and finance, institutional governance, technological and informational options, and behavioral and cultural as well. So the variety of options that we look at is quite large. And this is from the sixth assessment report. So then we try to understand, well, can these options be actually implemented? And so we look at feasibility, but we also look at effectiveness. So how effective then is that option in terms of reducing climate risk? So that's a big amount of work that's happening at the moment as well. And sorry, this is very IPCC, so it's very hard to read and understand. And some of the work that's ongoing is looking at adaptation pathways. So that's the more kind of future forward-looking decision-making. So when do you make which decisions? So if you have, for instance, if you're investing in seawalls at the moment, how long will those be effective? When do you actually have to add other options? And at what time scale? So this is specifically related to sea level rise. And we also look at dimensions of transformational adaptation. So to what extent are those actions then able to deliver positive change? And this again is from the sixth assessment, and in the seventh we are also looking into which options would fall in which categories. And this is usually across depth, speed, scope, and then limits to adaptation as well. So at what point do you actually face a hard or soft limit that you either have to make other choices? And we are very much interested in different types of, I suppose, innovation. So this is from, for instance, from Copenhagen, where they are rethinking parks. So what does that mean if you have increasing, for instance, sea levels? And these are actually used so you can move them around the city as well. So if you have a festival, you can move the whole thing to another place. So there's a lot of innovation actually also in how cities are reimagining climate adaptation responses as well. And another really important part is understanding adaptation benefits, and this goes back to some that Sam was talking about yesterday. So how do we sell climate adaptation? And this is from an older report from 2019 with the Global Commission on Adaptation. So they were trying to make statistics to show, well, is it worth investing in climate adaptation? And these are some of the numbers that they came up with across the 5 options. They looked at early warning systems, if we make new infrastructure more resilient to climate change, improving dryland agriculture and mangrove protection, and what does that look like in terms of the benefit-cost ratio but also the net benefits. And adaptation benefits are in the outline for working group 2 in different chapters as well. So we're also trying to look at, well, how do you actually then have this how do you quantify adaptation benefits across different sectors? And this is, so some of you might have seen this slide. So this is from a paper that we published a few years ago on trying to understand, well, what is the link between Earth observations and climate adaptation? So we often talk about the adaptation cycle, which is the 4 different phases of adaptation policy and planning. So we have the impacts and risk assessment. That's usually the starting point. And you can see the different types of questions that people would be asking around vulnerability and exposure, and then also what kind of data could support that process from the EO side. Also with planning, so trying to decide, well, what are the adaptation responses or options that should be implemented, where and when, and what are some of the potential data sets that could help with that. And then also monitoring or understanding implementation, so what responses have been implemented and where, and then the monitoring and evaluation as well, so where they're actually effective, and there's a whole big discussions around also successful adaptation. So did it actually achieve the goals? And in that conversation, equity and justice in particular are increasingly really, really important. So we might be implementing an adaptation option in a community that benefits only a minority, and then a lot of other, especially marginalized and vulnerable groups, don't actually benefit from that action. So how can we identify actions and options that are more equitable as well? And there are current projects and activities in this space, so most of you are probably familiar with some of these, but this year the Committee of Earth Observation Satellites are actually developing Earth Observations for Climate Adaptation Handbook, so that will have lots of different types of case studies showcasing this link between the climate adaptation and EO data as well. And there's several funded projects. So there's currently a EU-funded underpin project that's looking at developing indicators to measure progress on climate resilience. So they are using multiple tools, so Earth observation data, but they're also bringing in citizen science and AI tools as well. And some of you probably have seen that ESA, so the European Space Agency, had a call for funding for projects last year focusing on climate adaptation indicators. And we are very happy to announce that one of those projects, which is called the Global Goal and Adaptation Track EO, has been selected as one of those projects. So we'll be working with CLS and Wageningen University, trying to develop adaptation indicators, but also looking at that data linkage. So how can we use Earth observations data in measuring whether those indicators are actually relevant? So that contract has been just signed. So hopefully we can kick off soon. And there are different types of partnerships. So we know that Copernicus Climate Change Service and the Atmosphere Monitoring Service with European Investment Bank are, for instance, looking at climate risk assessment tools and how do you integrate all of that data for climate adaptation. But what I wanted to also talk about is the assumptions that we make about the future. And because I am in chapter 4, which is the future adaptation, so this is very much at the heart of that. So how do we make decisions under uncertainty? What assumptions do we hold about how the climate is changing, how the geopolitics are changing as well, and how do those impact on the work that we do? So I wanted to share a few quotes, and all of these quotes are from experts in those fields. So, for instance, a Hollywood film producer said in 1946 that TV basically will disappear. Like, who would like to look at that box? And I think we know what happened with that one. 1995, Robert Metcalfe, founder of one of the internet companies, said, well, I predict that internet will be a flop, complete flop. And again, I think we know that did not turn out like that. And what's interesting with the last quote from 1903 from the president of the Michigan Savings Bank, so he was saying, well, again, cars are a fad. The horse is here to stay. And if we think about, again, that hasn't really happened. And what's really interesting with this example is that the New York City Council, actually at a time when cars were being developed fast-tracked by Ford, they were just only focusing on horse manure on the streets and looking at these, estimates how much more, there's more people, so we need more horses, and there will be more waste issues, while the cars and the car production was skyrocketing. So a lot of my research especially is trying to ask those kind of questions. So what assumptions are we making as experts, whether that's about climate or geopolitics, that might be accurate. And an area that we are very interested in is this kind of what Jane McConigal calls the signals of change. So what are those emerging technologies? We heard a lot about AI yesterday, machine learning, how that's, we see in so many sectors how that's being used and is accelerating. But it's ideas and technologies and habits of the future, so things that are kind of on the margins, but that might really scale up even climate action soon in the future as well. And in climate adaptation, we're also interested so we're looking at accelerators, for instance, so accelerators for climate adaptation action. But also, I think this goes back to the assumptions. So what are the outliers and wildcards that we are not paying attention to? So what are maybe some of the systemic weaknesses? So assumptions, for instance, that if we have crises, supply chains will still remain intact. And, with COVID, we saw that was not the case. And with the recent geopolitical crisis, we've also seen, massive issues that people haven't maybe paid attention to. And what are some of the intersections between sectors where there might be the weak linkages or different types of social dynamics that we are not even looking at or considering? And the increasing technology dependence that we see in all sectors. And question marks, other things that we are not even thinking about. And we do a lot of modeling, and we do try to obviously reduce uncertainty. But I like this quote because, it's the most dangerous risk. We know how to model things, but, we also assume that certain things cannot happen. And I think in the last few years we've seen over and over again, and those things have happened. So how can we identify where we might actually have a failure of imagination in how we think about the world and the processes that we look at and work with? And another increasingly interesting area for us is who is in your future now? So we know that climate is changing. We know that some areas are experiencing events that they say are unprecedented. So they have never experienced that before. But there are other places where that's just like normal daily life. So for instance, London had massive heat waves a week ago, and I was there, and living in Australia, you kind of go, that's okay. But for instance, excess rain, so we have cases in Seattle and Copenhagen where they have experienced this and have put really robust policies and plans in place. For instance, for cyclones, so we have in Australia, Darwin, Florida, Caribbean. So there's a lot of experiences in these communities already. How do you deal with this? How do you prepare for disasters? And how do you do climate adaptation? So we're increasingly interested in seeing these kind of shifts when the climate is changing and how some communities can actually help those who are moving to this new normal. And I wanted to leave you with this question. So if the communities that we work with and the countries that we work with, in 2050, look back to 2026, so what do we need to do for them to say, look, they prepared us well for this future? And I think that's one of the key questions that at least drives my IPCC work, but drives also my own research, how we can make good decisions today that prepare us for the future. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Joanna. That was a fantastic framing, and I really liked the coverage of all the questions we need to be asking, the potential innovation coming out. So we've got time for questions, so please raise your hand. Before then, though, I'm going to take the chair's prerogative. I really liked your failure of imagination, and I think that's what we see increasingly, that events are happening in locations that it's not unusual in other parts of the world, but and these events are well forecast, but the decision makers don't have the awareness of the severity of the event. And is that part of the thinking in terms of how do we improve the pathways so that decision makers are aware of the future risk and act effectively when they have that forecast?
Yeah, definitely. And I think it was you or somebody else who had that example yesterday, that they knew that there was, the forecasts were saying that there was going to be a heat wave, and the decision makers did nothing with that information. So I think there is this really big need to make those connections. So what data do you have? And then actually translate that to something that decision makers actually understand. But I think it also relates to the urgency, and risk perceptions of people. Do they actually understand the extent of the risk?
Great. And I saw a hand up here, so can we get a microphone over here? Oh, perfect. And then to Carlo.
Yeah, thanks.
Oh.
Okay. No, still not working? Oh, yeah, there it is. Thanks. I'm Judith Klosterman from the Netherlands. I wanted to ask, in all the adaptation options that you are considering, were you also considering not doing things? Because, people will say, good, let's have sustainable energy, but we want the fossil fuel too, right? But how about, all the food that we don't need because it doesn't give us any nourishment and things like that?
That's a very interesting question. So a lot of the research is more, I suppose, focused on the active options, what people choose. But we also see in decision making that not making a decision is also an option. So sometimes we talk about kind of fast adaptation where there's a heightened urgency, so you do need the options to be in place. But sometimes the best risk management might be that you hold off in terms of the timing of the decision, and gather more information as well.
Great. Carlo?
Well, first of all, thank you very much. It was a splendid talk, really interesting, and very much complementary to what we heard in other part of the GA. And I understand your point being mostly on not the data that we have, but all the rest that is needed. But I couldn't resist to spot in your diagram that the single action that has the biggest return on investment is early warning, really high. So my question to you is, what sort of warning we are not doing and will make the biggest difference, and what should we do in the warning we have to, a bit what you were saying now, to cover the last mile so that this warning actually trigger action? Thank you.
I feel like you know the answer to that. What kind of warning? I think it relates to what we were discussing before. Like, how do you actually materialize or explain what the warning actually means? So I think there's a big communication part on that, but that's like so much more your territory.
Maybe if I can add on to that, and I think heat waves are a great case in point. So I'm also Australian, so delighted to see a fellow here. In the heat wave that we had in the UK, I can only speak for the UK experience because that's where I live, but people don't know how to behave when it's hot. They open the windows when it's hotter outside than inside the house. No one in Australia would do that because you're heating up your house by letting the hot air in. So we need that education of, when weather is exceptional, here's how you need to behave. Go for it, in the middle.
Thank you. And in relation to this, I completely agree that it is a really, really important factor, because precisely that example being from southern Spain is what I relate when I'm in the north. But I think something that we need is to try, the same way we are collecting data on what may happen or not happen, what I detect sometimes from the institutions is that they, by law, by recommendations, are forced to take actions, but nobody is monitoring if it's effective actions or not, or sometimes they just tick in a box, we have done something. And I think if we could try to go in the direction of monitoring, create kind of a repository database to know what other places are doing, because for human nature, if somebody recommends you what to do, you are reluctant to say so. But if somebody tells you, your neighbor is already doing it, people is much more eager to act. So I think to try to have this knowledge, okay, in the places where they do have this type of problem, they act like this, let's not reinvent the wheel. Let's try to learn what we already know it's working. And I think trying to have try to collect that data in addition to the climate data per se or the extremes data that we may be facing, it's something that we will need to try to do and try to have the whole picture better collected to ease the policy making. But I don't know if you know if that's something that is already being done or until which extent.
I don't think it's probably done the way that you explained it, but I know that in the UNFCCC, they are looking at this kind of who's living in your normal. So trying to connect countries and communities as well throughout that process, to share the kind of best practice on different types of adaptation options, for instance, in regions that already experience that. But I do like the way you explained it, I think that would be really valuable to actually connect the hazard and the actual actions that are effective. And I think you're right, like a lot of the times there's also urgency and there's public pressure that governments must act, so they must do something, but we need a lot more information on, well, what is actually effective. And I'm personally very interested in this, what is not the single action, but what are your top priority actions that actually work, rather than having 100 options? What are the top 5 that are going to bring that change?
Exactly. Thank you very much.
Yeah, and at the back of the room, and I think that'll be the final question, but hopefully we'll have time at the end, otherwise a coffee break.
Thanks, Joanna, for a very interesting presentation. We've been considering mitigation and adaptation sort of as separate tracks over many years, but I've noticed recently there's a move towards talking about climate action, where the idea is to combine both. Like, I do some work in Ireland, and they're like different departments, both at the national level and locally, sort of look at mitigation actions, and then this other group look at adaptation, and often then that can lead to conflicts. So do you think it is useful to perhaps almost rebrand or change the way we talk about this and consider it under climate action, where we can then combine potentially mitigation and adaptation actions together, so that we're considering everything sort of as a whole rather than these independent tracks?
Yeah, so my answer would be yes and no as a good scientist. I think yes, as in terms of looking at those conflicts. So one of the favorite examples is usually air conditioning, right? So you adapt by putting air conditioning, but if that energy is coming from fossil fuels, you're actually skyrocketing emissions, and we are seeing that in many cities where that's happening, unless, if that comes from renewable energy. So I think there are definitely conflicts. The no would be that a lot of the focus on climate action is still on mitigation. So I've been working on adaptation since 2007, and even in Australia we still struggle because people don't understand adaptation. They understand what reducing emissions means, and it's super easy to calculate. You can get all the quantification, which actions are reducing how much. But when we start talking about adaptation, and I think that, the slide where we have all these different options, but all these different areas that we have to consider, it becomes this kind of everything, and people really struggle with that. So I would say yes for climate action, looking at both, but then also kind of, trying to explain what adaptation is as well.
Great. Please join me in thanking Joanna again. Okay, and now I welcome our next speaker to the stage, Chris de Meyer from University College London. And Chris does need to depart very soon after this presentation, so we'll have time for questions after your talk. Chris, over to you.
Okay, thank you. When I was emailing back and forth with the organizers, one of them said, we suggest this title for you, Climate Risk Communication Will Decide the Future. And by the way, you've got 10 minutes to talk about this. And I said, okay, let's give it a try. Let's see what we can do. So I'm a neuroscientist, and what a neuroscientist is doing working on climate change will hopefully become clear over the next 10 minutes. I am going to talk a little bit about neuroscience and then talk about examples of how we are trying to bring knowledge of how the brain works to get risk information connected to action, which already sat in a lot of the questions that you were asking before. Okay, so I'm going to give you a 2-minute potted neuroscience talk introducing the most up-to-date scientific view of how the human brain works. Here we go. The human brain is an engine for action. It's not for thinking or perceiving, but for producing behavior. That is the core purpose of the brain. Thinking and perceiving are side effects. Brains run on an internal Bayesian risk model of the world, which some of you might know what that means, that is expressed in terms of an action repertoire. Our risk model is not expressed in terms of risk quantities. It is expressed in a set of action possibilities that can be triggered when certain information hits our senses. These action possibilities, you can think of them as recipes that we have in our heads that allows us to know how to respond in a certain situation. Those action repertoires that we have in our heads are learned from past data. They're shaped by past behavior, by the personal experiences that we have, and by the professional expertise that we build up as we become an expert in science, in policy, in economics, and so on. That means that if you have different expertise, you will run around with very different action repertoires in your head. So the same information, for example, climate data, will trigger very different action responses in different people. Each person's action repertoire is finite. As people, we can only draw on the action possibilities that are already available to us, and learning new action possibilities often requires a lot of time, effort, and inspiration from other people who you see take an action, as we already heard. Applying that to the story that we heard, the heat wave in London from a few weeks ago, I know that Brits open their windows and let the hot air in. I'm not from there. And so I was thinking the first day we lived in a new place, and the first day I saw the sun coming in through a window during the hottest part of the day. And I said to myself, I have to do something about this. And hanging a curtain on the inside is also not the right thing. So I went to a garden center. I picked up a bamboo garden shield and I hung it on the outside of the window. And the next day I had a much fresher kitchen, not so hot as the day before. So the reason why I could think of that is because I'd been working with adaptation experts on how do you shield buildings from overheating. So I had the action possibility in my head, the conditions triggered it, and I could execute it. Very simple example, but it applies to all of us in all of the different contexts where we are operating. So, what does that mean for risk communication? To enable effective responses to novel threats like climate change, we must expand people's repertoire of action possibilities. In other words, across all our combined risk communication endeavors, what all of us are doing as a community, what needs to be part of that is helping people to discover and internalize new ways to act. And this principle applies to all of us. To us as scientific community, to the policymakers we are trying to advise, to the politicians that we hope are giving coverage to civil servants and so on to take certain actions, to decision makers in business, finance, media, citizens, etc. And I'll come back to that point near the end. Okay, now that we've done the potted neuroscience talk, let's look at some examples. The first application where this plays out, all of that brain knowledge, is in something that we call risk currencies. So we've coined that term to talk about metrics that busy decision makers already grasp intuitively because of their prior expertise. They already have a set of action possibilities and an understanding built into that brain model that allows them, when they see a piece of data, to say like, there's something seriously wrong here, I have to do this particular action. And you can usually get to people's risk currency by asking them the question, what is it that keeps you awake at night? The answers that they give you in response will actually allow you to understand what their risk currencies are. And to reach those busy decision makers then on climate risk, the information needs to be in their risk currency and not the one that happens to be the data that you are studying or working on. So let's look at some examples of how we then put that to work. In 2021, we were working with Chatham House on their climate change risk assessment, and the researcher had taken some data from very good academic papers and was translating that into a format that was more sort of relevant to decision makers, because the audience for this report was heads of government. They wanted this report land with heads of government, summarize climate risk for ministers and presidents around the world in preparation for in the COP26 in Glasgow. Now, the way that the data had been translated into something that then supposedly was summarizing it for these heads of government, we thought like, we're not so sure about this, we need to test this. And of course, you can't go to a minister or president and ask them for an hour of their time. So we did the next best thing. We invited their briefing officials to come to some co-production meetings. And we showed them bits of information and stories and ways to storytell the climate risk information in order to then test and refine how that report was going to be written. And so we started with what the researcher was working on, which was these kinds of figures. And you may not be able to see it, but this red curve that is going up is the number of people that is expected to be exposed to major heat waves each year from now till the end of the century. And you can see that curve going up to sort of 7-8 billion, meaning that practically the whole planet will be experiencing heat waves under that specific pathway. And we thought like, we're not sure that this data is going to work. So we put that in front of these briefing officials, and we got these kinds of responses. The first response was this. Well, all I see in the stuff that you're showing me are lines that are going up on a page, and I have no idea what that means. And isn't that what a lot of our climate data looks like lines that go up on a page? And it didn't really matter if we put it on maps. It still was like not really making sense to them. The second thing, a second kind of story or response that we get was this one. I might have 2 minutes with my minister in between a briefing on Russia and North Korea, and this really isn't going to land. This really isn't going to make that minister pay attention to what I have to do. So we did a lot of different things to break through those responses. And one of the things that we did was to make it very visible how data of this type affects things that heads of government should be worried about or should be caring about or will be caring about because it's in their risk currency. And so, for example, we made it very explicit how heat leads to workability, survivability problems, leads to economic loss and health crisis. So now you're making it very visible for those decision makers to understand how these data and the stories that we were weaving around the data were leading to things that they did understand. The Global Tipping Points report has taken that further now. They have an entire section now where they do risk currency translation and where they've made that very explicit how you do the translation of data about tipping points into something that decision makers would care about. So, but that isn't enough, because just giving the information, as we've already been discussing in the previous session, doesn't necessarily generate the action. And so the second part here is, how do you spark the new action possibilities? And here I'm going to talk about just one example. So we did our climate risk message testing. Once we started to get through, once our stories and our ways of connecting things were starting to hit the mark for those briefing officials, we started to get this response. Stop telling us how bad it is. We already know. We don't need more of that. Now, in parallel, in the same project, we were also working with a team in Oxford University on a report on the energy transition and what governments could be doing more to accelerate the energy transition through funding the right type of deployment of these technologies that are rapidly declining in cost, etc. And they had their own communication challenges, mostly around, we don't know how to make this work. That was the policymakers, the energy policymakers were saying, we don't know how to make it work in the context in which we're operating. So we started to do some experimental workshops, which we ended up calling the carrot and stick workshops, where we would pair a bit of scary climate risk information with then a bit of, here's an opportunity to transition faster to a low carbon future. And we didn't really get anywhere, no matter whether we put the action first and the risk second, or the risk first and the action second, we were still getting very similar responses. So we thought it was our fault, so we got the experts, the absolute experts producing the data, to come and give the briefings, and it didn't make any difference. And so instead of that, we ended up building a digital scenario where we got the policymakers to practice how do you pull the levers of taxation and regulation and subsidies in order to accelerate projects that are part of that energy transition that needs to happen. And once they were doing that experientially, it started to make a difference. We got, for example, one head from a finance ministry from a European country saying, like, I came to this meeting thinking that the markets were going to solve climate change, but now I see that there is a role for governments to play here as well. So that might be really flabbergasting you, but that thinking is rife in policy circles, because if you don't have the action possibilities, if your action repertoire exists of market-solving problems, then that is the traditional response that you will get. Okay, so circling back to this, I said this principle applies to all of us, and I'm going to give you 2 pointers in how we can apply to us as academic community. What is it that we can be doing differently from how we thought of doing things in the past? So we need to become better at translating the climate risk into the risk currencies of decision makers. And you can do that by asking questions, what keeps you awake at night, of the people that you are making things for, the end users of your work, and then listen to what they are saying. Second point is that we need to learn to spark new action possibilities in our target audiences. And none of us can do this on our own. Like, we all have our own narrow area of expertise, and we will need to work together with people who have different kinds of expertise. That digital storytelling scenario, we ended up making that with theater makers, because we didn't know how to make a story that would be engaging. So we brought people in who knew how to do that. We worked with the energy experts, we worked with the risk experts, and that collaboration produced something that did then spark some new action possibilities. That's it for me.
Thank you so much, Chris. That was fascinating. And yeah, so many anecdotes there of creating change and understanding the brain blockages of why people don't take a graph seriously. All right, we've got time for questions. One at the back of the room, and then middle.
Hi, thank you for this really interesting talk. I'm reminded of another crisis where scientists had to communicate risk to policymakers and to the general public. 6 years ago, the COVID pandemic. What parallels do you see between that crisis, which is obviously much shorter term, and the climate crisis? And how do you think the COVID crisis might have influenced people's action repertoires for climate change?
Ooh, okay. On the last question, probably very little spillover, I think. On your first question, that one was very quickly framed in terms of actions. Whether these were the appropriate actions or not, that is like still a policy debate or an analysis debate that is going on. But very quickly, we were being told doable actions that we could do in order to deal with the situation. And that's a situation where risk leads to action once you can make that connection in an easy way. On climate, it is far more about how do we reshape the system around us to allow doable actions in our everyday lives to become possible. And so it's much more about what is it that decision makers need to do differently in order to reshape the system such that the transition accelerates and we can all do low carbon, have all low carbon lifestyles, that the adaptation measures become things that were easy to implement, etc. So that's the, sometimes I say that I work on behavior change for professionals rather than on behavior change for the public, because it's our behavior that needs to change in order to reshape the system such that then our everyday behaviors become the right ones.
Thank you.
Thanks, that was a very fascinating talk. And it's often said that people are very responsive to stories and storytelling. So I wondered if there's an aspect, even in the professional domain, of stories being ways of increasing people's repertoire.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. So we call this action-based storytelling, and you actually saw me do a lot of it. I told you the story of this happened and then that happened. And it is the recipe to unlock things. It's actually also the thing that we noticed in the risk report, that the data in itself did not generate any response. It was the story that we put around the data when we said, oh, this kind of thing that you see on this graph, Australia had one of those in 2006 and it led to these problems. And then China had one of these in 2010 and it led to these problems. So we needed to storytell even the pure data when you're just on the risk side. And then very quickly you need to get to the action side. And we're doing a project at the moment, it's very, very, very early days, where we're trying to do something around AMOC collapse and getting the policy world to have the right response to the small but very significant and important risk that exists around an impeding AMOC collapse. And we're really trying to get the action response from the policymakers. We're trying to tell the story of the risk through stories of action, rather than get the risk information right and then hope they'll figure it out for themselves.
Great. Any final questions? Yeah, one at the back.
Yeah, thank you for your impressive speech, and I'd like to follow up on your question, and I'd like to hear your opinion on that. I mean, with COVID-19, there was an incubation time of 14 days. Okay, and our brain is fantastic in action and reaction, right? With climate change, as I understand it, we have a kind of an incubation time of 30 years. The time lag between greenhouse gas emissions and the actual temperature increase is 30 years. So don't you think it would be important to get that really into our communication design, because from decision making in dynamic systems, we know that our brain, our cognitive abilities perform really poorly in such a condition.
Yes, absolutely, and it can be done in a similar format as what I've discussed before. So we do a lot of work on adaptive pathway planning as well. We're helping organizations to implement it into the fabric of their organization. And the first thing that we're doing in that work is take dates out of the equation. Like, don't try to predict what the future looks like and then get ready for something by a certain date, because that's already leading to polarization in the room, with some people believing that that date is feasible and other people not believing. The second thing that then we do is that we work back from, we drop people in the future. We say, like, at some unspecified in the future, these are the kinds of decisions that you might need to make. And then start working your way back to the actions that you need to take now and in the near term and the medium term in order to be ready or postpone or prevent these kinds of things from happening. So that's how you cross that time lag. And so often it is by dropping you in a future, not a beautiful future, a nightmarish future that you need to avoid, and then working your way back from that.
Please join me in thanking Chris again. Okay, our next speaker is an online presentation, so hopefully he will magically appear behind me. Yes, fantastic. Welcome, Andrea. So I now give the floor to Andrea Mariano from the European Food Security Authority.
Thank you very much, Samantha. And first of all, let me tell you that I'm very sorry to not be there with you, but unfortunately, due to an accident during the winter season while skiing, it was not possible to join you in Budapest. So I am. Can you confirm that you can see my screen? Okay. So, hello everyone. So I'm Andrea Majorano from the Plant Health Risk Assessment team from EFSA. And in my presentation, I'm going to show you how we are using C3S data to support our risk assessment in EFSA in the context of food safety in general, and more in particular for the activities that I follow in Plant Health. So first of all, what is EFSA? EFSA is the European Food Safety Authority. We are one of the agencies of the European Union. We are based on the north of Italy in Parma. And what we do is we deliver independent scientific advice and support to the European Commission, the European Parliament, the member states, and we have also EFSA self-mandate. And we support EU risk managers and policy makers on, broadly speaking, all whatever concern risk related to food and feed safety. And so how the way we work is that we receive usually, I mean, in the 99% of the cases, we receive mandate from the European Commission asking us to perform risk assessment on a specific topic, in our case in plant health, on specific organism. We set up, we collaborate with working group of experts, and we produce our scientific assessment. We are not a research center, but we are an agency working with a working group of experts. So why do we need authoritative climate data? So during the last few years, in general, the geospatial dimension of EFSA risk assessment has grown. And there has been a growing use of geospatial data, including climate data. And also, we have received a growing request during the last few months, the last few years, from the European Commission to include the potential impact of climate change in our risk assessment. And so, accessing to quality geospatial data, in particular to climate data, has become a strategic priority. And we are meeting this need by building on ECNWF and Copernicus C3S data. And which are the domains that are interested in using the climate information in EFSA? So there are some areas, some domains, some teams like the plant health, the animal health and welfare, the GMO, that are already using climate data, that already know the importance of this information. And there are also other domains, other teams that are learning, where awareness is increasing about the importance of including the climate information in their risk assessment, in particular environmental risk assessment, biological hazard, and pesticides. So this is why some years ago we decided to start the SEED project. SEED stands for Spatial Explicit Environmental Data. And this will become the EFSA cloud platform for agroclimate services and climate data supporting health and risk applications. So the main objectives of the project are to develop ready-to-use, user-friendly web tools, including agroclimatic services, that will allow us to compute agroclimatic metrics, run simulation models, and visualize the output in maps without the need of coding or GIS software. And without the need for our experts who don't have those skills of using coding or GIS software. In this way, we can support our risk assessment. So the platform and the agroclimatic metrics that we are developing, that we use for our analysis, were designed around our needs. But some of them you will see are of more general interest, could be used also in other domains. Another objective of this project is to create an internal platform where EFSA staff, our expert and our contractors can develop new analysis, new simulation models to support our risk assessment. And all the project is built on authoritative climate data. We are ingesting at the moment the ERA5 land data set. We are going to ingest also the AGRA5 plus the CMIF6 climate projections. And the user-friendly tools that we are developing will be available to all registered users starting from October 2026, which is when the project should end. Here you have an example of the user interface of the SEED platform, the one that will be available to registered users. And so you enter in the platform. You may select from the catalog, for instance, the calculation of degree days. You specify the parameters, select the region for the analysis, and you get the output that can also be downloaded. This is just an example. We are finalizing the user interface. And as I told you, the C3S data behind SEED are the ERA5 land data set. We are ingesting the different time resolution, hourly, daily, and monthly. And for the moment, we are ingesting variables that are the main variables for us that are of interest to us, so air and soil temperature, precipitation, including snow cover, 50 years of data. We are going to ingest in a second phase also climate change projection. And we have analysis and models that can use both climate data and the derived matrix as input. And just to tell you a bit more, for instance, in the context of plant health, we are developing agrometeorological metrics that we know can be useful for us because we have already used some of these type of metrics in the past, because the metrics that we develop are often based also on what is known about the organism that is under assessment. And this is so we use also species distribution models, and the way we use them is that we collect a lot of information. We try to collect information about where those organisms are present in the world, and then we use this model together with bioclimatic variables to develop maps of climate suitability in Europe. And so we are going to implement into this platform agroclimatic metrics, correlative models like species distribution models, but also process-based models like this is a model that we have used in the past this is a model that is used for fungal foliar pathogens, and also physiologically based population dynamics model. And in fact, a grant call that closed 1 week ago, we are funding the development in our platform of a generic physiologically based insect population dynamic model, and also additional generic correlative and process-based models that can support our risk assessment. This in the context of best risk assessment in plant health. But as I told you at the beginning, in the platform, we are also developing, implementing some agrometeorological analyses that are used by our colleagues of the GMO team to reply. I mean, the main question they have to reply in their assessment when they receive application from applicants is if the field trials were conducted in areas that are representative of specific crop main areas of cultivation. And for doing this, they use climate data, reference soil data, phenological data, and some information from remote sensing. Regarding the avian influenza, we are going to use also weather forecast as input to model to predict the bird migration. And also we are designing other climate matching approaches to identify areas climatically similar to input locations. This was relevant, for instance, to the colleague of the pesticide team. So where we are now, as I told you, we are now finalizing the last technical aspects of the platform. Seed will end at the end of the project. Seed will end at the end of 2026. And what I realized, so I'm from the plant health team, as I told you, and our team has been using climate data and geospatial data since many years now. So we basically have a knowledge of what we want. But during the development of the seed project, I realized that there are many areas in EFSA where it's important to raise awareness and capacity building about what climate data, what the climate information can add to our risk assessment. And we are broadening our agroclimatic indicators and models, but we have also to learn a lot because we need new, more modern analysis and new ways for visualizing data. I mean, following the last presentation, it's important to bring the right information to the policymakers. Our main stakeholders are the policymakers in Brussels, and one of the issues we always have to face is the best way to communicate the output of our risk assessment, which may be easy to understand and read by scientists, but then we need to conceive to bring the right results and information to the policymaker. I would like to thank also the ECMWF team because to ingest the data, I mean, in order to use the data set that we are ingesting, we established a kind of informal in collaboration with them, and so we are early tester of the new ArcosR format and feeding feedback back to them while it's still in development. And we are also taking part in the first phase of user needs analysis shaping the new C3S agroclimatic services. And so in our context, the seed is a story about what authoritative C3S data makes possible for EU decision making. As I told you, there are different areas like communication that we need in relation to climate data, to climate information, to climate output that we need to improve. And let me thanks again the ECMWF and C3S for supporting SEED, and thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much for the presentation, Andrea. Any quick questions from the room? Yeah, on the far side.
Thank you. Thanks, Andrea. Quick question. I noticed that you mentioned that you are transferring a lot of data from ingesting from the C3S data services into your system. Why is that necessary? And could that be avoided if we provided the data differently?
So this is an option that we consider at the beginning and during the technical analysis of the project. But we prefer to ingest the data. That was a decision that was taken also in relation to the architecture of the platform. Okay, so this is one reason. So our IT architect preferred to have the data to run ourselves, our model and simulation and analysis within yes architecture. And another reason is that we took at the beginning is that we need to ensure that we are able to reproduce any type of simulation or analysis that we did in the past. And for doing this, we have to be sure to have the same data set that was used for a specific analysis for a specific risk assessment. So that was the decision, that were the reason why we decided to ingest the full data set.
Okay, thank you so much. Please join me in thanking Andrea again.
Thank you.
And now I'm delighted to welcome Roman Rahel as our final speaker in this session from the European Investment Bank.
Good morning, everyone. Thanks for inviting me again. I'm always learning so much when I come to your General Assemblies. For example, my brain obviously doesn't have a core task to think, and that really explains a lot. So I'm here to talk about our fantastic collaboration with C3S. European Investment Bank is a public bank owned by the European member states, so we're not a commercial bank. We invest into public policy interests, and climate change continues to be a central one. But I want to start with a question that we've been asking ourselves for more than 10 years in the EIB, and that is, do we even know what adaptation is? And you might think, yes, of course we know, we have scientific definitions for it, right? There are even legal concepts emerging and so on. There are tons of guidelines and so on. But in the financial community, the answer is we don't know what adaptation is. And we don't know until we can answer this question. Is my investment at risk from a climate hazard? If we can't answer that question for our investment, we don't know what adaptation is. Now, we have a legal definition in Europe now, which is really a landmark in terms of regulation. It's called the EU Taxonomy for Sustainable Activities. It defines everything that's a green investment, and it has a section on adaptation. And I can just really compliment the Commission for being brave and putting this out there to the marketplace. It was a controversial thing to land. It has been there for several years. And in essence, it captures really what adaptation is also in the scientific terms, right? A process of understanding your climatic conditions for the activity in the context that you're operating. And it also has this list of all the climate hazards that you should take into consideration. Now, if you take this into a conversation about a loan or an investment, if you put this in front of your client without any further explanations, they will probably leave the room and you won't have an investment. So these are our numbers of the last couple of years. The EIB has allocated more than 5 billion in euros in adaptation investments that we've been able to verify against the EU taxonomy principles. And that has been an increase of around 4 times in the last 5 years. So before 2021, adaptation finance was, in banking terms, almost flat, less than 1 billion, a couple of 100 billions every year. That is almost flat, that's almost nothing. And you might think, okay, a 4-time increase in 5 years, that's tremendous, so we must be doing something right. The bad news is this is all basically handcraft adaptation financing put into action with tremendous overhead. We have engineers, something that most banks don't afford. We have advisory service, we have public financing or funding from the Commission to support our clients, and we had to use all of that to make those 5 billion possible last year. It was a tremendous amount of work, and the question really is, can we continue increasing this? And we are not sure. It feels like we're already seeing a bit of a plateauing at this level, and clearly 5 billion is not even close to what we need in adaptation financing to protect us in the Union and also to support developing countries that are collaborating with the European Union, that are relying on us to be a stable, trusted, long-term partner in the international community. So there's a lot more that we, in theory, can invest. And at the EIB, we've earmarked 30 billion for adaptation financing until 2030, so a big commitment. But it's really difficult to allocate this financing because we really don't know what adaptation is in the financing world. Now, to give you a comparison example, this is the green financing that the EIB has done in the same period. Over 50 billion, most of that is renewable energies, public transport, energy efficiency, and infrastructure. So most of that is mitigation action. So it's roughly 9 times the amount we've been doing for adaptation. What do we need to scale up adaptation finance in the banking community? We need to get a couple of things right to work. We need to have skills, technology, and the capital for it. We need to have agreed definitions. What is it that defines a green investment? We need to have operational financial products. We don't need to have theoretical financial products. We need to make them work for all the counterparties in the investment, in the lending value chain. And in order to scale up, ideally we have grants and public incentives from governments to make people come to the bank, to make people spring to action, motivate them. For mitigation, we more or less have this in Europe, more or less, in most member states. Skills, more or less the technology, capital. We have green definitions. Everybody knows what mitigation activities are. They're easy to identify, they're easy to certify and to confirm. We have operational financial products. You could go to a local branch tomorrow, hand in a loan application for solar on your roof, and most bankers would know what to do with it, right? Grants, incentives, many countries would give you a cheaper loan or a state subsidy, a grant to help you do the investment. For adaptation, we have the first two. We have all the skills, all the technology, all the capital in Europe, at least. And we also have the taxonomy, green definitions. So we can legally agree on what the principles are for adaptation. We don't have the operational financial products. You can't go to a bank and get an adaptation loan to adapt to the next heat wave in your home or protect it against floods. That's something we would like to be in a position in the next couple of years, but we don't have it today. And we hardly have any grant schemes or other incentives to do that. We have it for electric vehicles, energy-efficient homes, and so on. Even to make your home fit for elderly people, all of that. We have these type of subsidies, but we don't have it for adaptation. We don't have it because of this. We don't have an audit-proof assurance process that is usable, that can be used by non-experts, right? We don't have that. And that's where our collaboration can really contribute to help, to unlock this value chain, this product for adaptation finance in Europe. So the Copernicus data can have a catalytic role in that. So here's the EIB use case, how we're trying to put this into action at the moment and in the next few years. So when we approached our colleagues Carlo and Chiara from ECMWF for the first time, we put down a list of what are our expectations to the partnership. We wanted to cultivate climate data as a public good. We wanted to co-create a service, right, that works for the EIB with all its different services, all its different teams, but also for our clients across the economy. We wanted to contribute to harmonizing the use of climate data between different entities, between regulators and leading companies that set an example, cities that set an example for their peers. We wanted to make sure the data and the tools are in line with the regulations so it can become part of the assurance process, so it can be operationalized. We wanted to anchor it in trustworthy data and transparent processes so that people can go and understand how the data works, how the tools works, and see if that works for them, and then adopt it in their own organization when they do real decision-making, consequential decision-making. And we want to have this thing evolve over time and become a service for the long time that keeps on being responsive to the users. Because if you invest, you're investing into communities that are very dynamic and you need to keep up with them or your service becomes meaningless. I honestly thought when we first met that Carlo Chiara would be the guy on the other slide walking out of the room and say, it's not possible. But they said, okay, works for us. And that's when we started our collaboration. And by the way, we also wanted to be free of charge and as easy to use as possible, even if that is painful for everyone who's working on the academic side. It needs to be so easy or it's not going to work. All right, so we put this partnership in place, signed an MOU. The European Commission was ready to fund us through DG DEFIS. And we got Atkins Realis and Lobelia on board, 2 companies that are supporting us in developing the tool and the data sets. And then we decided we want to put basically 2 products out. Global climate hazard maps, global, that are in line with the taxonomy regulation and the expectations to the best degree possible in scientific terms. And a tool that we can make available to our own teams in the bank for when we take decisions on funding proposals and manage our own risk, but also for everybody else. So we are having basically complete transparency around how the EIB decides, but also how project developers can also anticipate, a potential requirement for adaptation in the project that they are developing. So here's a screenshot of the tool that we are now preparing for prototype testing in July. And we have basically defined 3 key inputs that are absolutely necessary and as simple as possible. So the users select the economic sector that they are working in. Then they select the lifespan where they need to take investment decisions, engineering decisions, political programming decisions in the city right now. The lifespan for the assets that they're going to build, buildings, roads, electricity networks, whatever it is. How long is that going to be out there and be used? And the locations of those investments. The tool will be able to cover up to 10 locations in the first release. Then you press the button and it generates a short list of screening results of those climate hazards that will be basically a different climate from what you're used to in your investment time horizon. So think of a road network that's going to be out there for decades, right? And the tool will be able to flag which of the climate hazards in your location will be so different that they're moving out of the climate variability that you've seen in the last couple of years. And that basically means your engineering codes may not be up to date anymore and you need to look into that. We're not going to tell you you are at risk or the EIB will not fund you. That's not the purpose of the tool. It's just to give you a heat map of where your potential risks may be, to focus on that and check if you've done a good job in designing your project. You will also have the possibility to dive into a bit more detail. If you are a project engineer, you want that, right? To understand the progression of the climate hazard over time, maybe the context around you on the map and so on. You can also manipulate the data a little bit to stress test your engineering decision or your designs if you want. So that's sort of a layer for advanced users. But that's where we are going to stop with the tool for the first release. And the idea really is to have a minimal viable product out by October, which brings me to the timeline. And we already have phase 2 planned, which will take us to 28 to continue improving the user engagement, adding the data that we need. And I can say already now we've put the concept in front of many of our clients and colleagues. And people are getting quite excited about that. We are having an impressive list of financial institutions and other important organizations are on the sort of the waiting list to test the tool in July, and we're getting really good early responses for that. So we want to carry this over into phase 2, learn what other requirements there are, and continue evolving the tool as we said our requirement is. We already know extreme events is very high on the requirement list, higher resolution, and features that go beyond climate, right? How do we translate changing climates into monetary losses? Can we do that? Can we model it? And what is the right type of action, right? How do we adapt, right? This information is out there, especially in Europe. Horizon EU has funded many activities for that. And we want to really try to create a place that aggregates all of this so we can connect through this collaboration the incredible work that many of you have been involved in and bring it down to the point in time, which are very short, time spans many times, where people decide stuff and decide things that are, then locking us into our future worlds. Infrastructure is a very good example for this. Cities and regions that are doing big investment programs over many years, they come to the EIB and we can, with this tool, we can boil it down to a couple of very succinct decision-making impulses, and we really want to create the place where this can take place informed by your work also. So we're super excited about it, and we're also talking to the European Commission about it, and I know the time, and we have agreed to really collaborate on harmonizing all the data sets that we are putting out there so that it can become a reference not just for EIB investments, but also for other European investments, like, for example, the next funding period for 2028 of EU financing. So we're really excited about the prospects of this activity. So we are now looking at the October launch, and if you invite me next year, then I'll give you an update on how it goes, and I'm happy to tell more about the details and the responses that we got after the launch in autumn. Thank you for listening. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Roman, and I can guarantee you will get an invitation for next year. So any questions for Roman in the room before we break for coffee? Yes, on the far side.
Thanks, very interesting presentation. I think the first speaker mentioned the need for preparing for events that we cannot really imagine, or things that we cannot really think about now that they might happen. Do you think that the data that you have included in your tool would allow for such analysis?
Thanks, excellent question. It kind of is a question for my colleagues at C3S, but from what I've seen, partly yes, but I think to a large degree also not. But it's really one of the reasons why we wanted to put this partnership in place, because our hope is that the data behind it is updated in sync with the science. We will add more features, especially for extreme events, and in order to broadcast them. And the EIB would be really interested in exploring how this could then inform our product offers. So we have, for example, we are financing disaster preparedness and recovery already through our existing financial instruments. We've started to put something in place that is called contingency loans. So we're basically already putting an earmark of financing into loans that are not for disaster, for a city, for example, so that they can immediately access that pot of money in case they are struck by a disaster. And if the data allows us to anticipate this more, then we would be able to use that for our financial products And I think it could be a very powerful thing. So it doesn't answer your question directly, but if it is possible, to the degree that it's reliable, then it would be very powerful, and we'd be interested to not just get the data and be in a position where we rely on authorities to act, but we could approach the authorities not just with a red flag about a broadcasted event. We could be in the same conversation with an offer of providing liquidity to start preparation basically tomorrow if we had the financial instruments and again the process for that. So it's an interesting element to follow on. Thank you.
Thanks. And final question from Joanna.
All right, thanks so much for your presentation. That was very refreshing. And I very much enjoyed the we don't know what adaptation is, because that is the big question. In terms of the adaptation options, so you had the kind of hazard screening tool to understand what might happen in particular locations or sectors. How do you see the product offerings for adaptation then? So if they are identifying particular hazards and they need to take adaptation action through implementing options and getting the loan, so what are some of the products that you're thinking?
Thanks. So pretty simple. I think this is a feature that we'd like to develop going forward. The ambition is to put a minimum viable product out as soon as possible to start having conversations with the users. One of the next steps would be to have, to screen the existing, science and research about what adaptation solutions work for which context, and trying to then operationalize that in a layer that would come after the workflow that you've seen on the screen, right? So basically, you would have to have a step where the user confirms that some of the screened-in climate hazards are indeed relevant for them, right? And then it could take the user into a next sort of section of the tool where the tool can have proposed adaptation solutions, right? And would be really interesting to also combine this with financial loss and damage modeling to see what would be my return on investment, right? Because we have pretty good understanding about what adaptation solutions may cost. I think it's not so difficult to model it in a tool. It's a bit more challenging to model the adaptation loss and damage side into financial terms, but regulators are expecting this increasingly, so this is happening in Europe. So if we can leverage all of that and again make it as simple as possible in a work stream, that could be a very powerful next feature.
Great. Please join me in thanking not only Roman, but all of the speakers this morning. Okay, and enjoy the coffee.
It's up the rise in the church where a wedding has been. Living a dream, what's out the window? Wearing a face that she keeps in a job at the door. Who is it for? Oh, the lonely people. Where do they all come from? Oh, the lonely people. Where do they all belong? Father Mackenzie, writing the words of a sermon that no one hear. No one comes near, look at him working down in the something tonight where there's nobody there. Why does he care? Oh, the lonely people, where do they all come from? Oh, the lonely people, where do they all belong? Ah, look at all the lonely people. Oh, the lonely people. Ah, look at all the lonely people. Oh, the lonely people. Ah, look at all the
Okay, please take your seat so that we can start our last session of this ninth GA of C3S. First of all, before we get into the nitty-gritty, we get into the speakers. Congratulations, you've managed to arrive in one piece to the end of the GA. And after yesterday dinner, this wasn't necessarily an easy thing to do, especially for those who went to 1 or 2 or 3 bars after the dinner. But this is also part of the C3S assembly. What this last session is all about is the evolution of the service. So where we are going and what the priorities will be in the next phase, but also how we will work together across services in the next phase of Copernicus. Before doing that, we thought it would have been quite useful to frame our discussion in broader terms of what's happening in the world of observations. So for that reason, we invited Peter Thorne, who many of you know very well, not only a professor in a University of Manhood in Ireland, but also the lead on our in situ contract, and more importantly, a fundamental person leading the rationalization of GCAS ECV. So without further ado, I leave the floor to Peter to tell us about the future of observation and GCAS. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Carlo. And I'm afraid I'm the kind of the downer talk here. I'm going to be giving the reality check, in a sense, to much of what we've discussed here. And I think it should be clear to you from the sessions so far that everything rests on the foundation of observations. And if that foundation is not strong, a climate service cannot be strong. What is derived from it cannot be strong. So GCAS is very concerned, it's fair to say. We will publish a status report and a high priority action plan in February of 2027. The status report will identify the gaps with a focus on sustainability issues, threats to the observing components and single points of failure in the system. There are increased threats to the observing system. I have grown up in a period in which the arc has been continuously upwards. Yes, there have been hiccups, but if you look back over the period since the Second World War, effectively, global observations have only ever been improving and systematically improving. So we had a kick-off meeting with the joint panel members on the status report in which we looked systematically at this problem. And I'm going to show preliminary results in the next slides. So assessment firstly was made by the current set of ECVs, and there are currently 55 ECVs, and we were looking at immediate threats, we were looking at gaps, we were looking at the climate data management and the climate data usability and exploitation. So the full value chain from making an observation, through sharing that observation, through archiving that observation, to making that observation usable and exploitable by end users, which is a fundamental component, but only a component of a climate service. So we asked some pretty hard questions of these experts in a structured solicitation. We asked them, is the observing system for your essential climate variable prone to a single point of failure as a whole? So is it fundamentally resting upon, say, a single satellite in orbit or a single agency taking these observations? How has the funding changed since 2022, when we last did a status report? Is it likely to have stable funding for the next 5 years? And is any ECV observing component system part under threat of continuity? So what we want here is lots of green, and what we would have seen historically is a lot of green. I'm now going to show you what the panels have said by panels. So starting with the atmosphere. There's quite a lot of green in here, but there is some very substantial red on things that really matter to monitoring and understanding the long-term climate change. Earth radiation budget is a single satellite from a single agency. Okay, components under threat for things like upper air humidity and ozone. We're losing the limb sounder capability. We've talked about this as GCOS. One of our former Secretariat members, who's now in the panel, went back and said GCOS first mentioned this 20 years ago and has mentioned it consistently since. It's been in the US Decadal Survey, and we've fallen asleep at the wheel. We're losing the capability to monitor both ozone and water vapor in the upper troposphere, lower stratosphere. There is a lot of yellow in this, particularly in components under threats. We are looking into an observing system that for the first time in my entire lifetime is systematically under threat. Ocean is even worse. Ocean observations are largely project-based funding. They lack the sustained coordination that atmospheric measurements do. There is a lot of concern in the ocean, particularly for subsurface temperature, and I note, since I prepared these slides, the recent US decision that has been communicated on ocean observations. We are losing our ability potentially to measure in a systematic way the ocean. Terrestrial has quite a lot of green on single point of failure, but everywhere else they're largely concerned. So across all three of the GCOS panels, the atmosphere, the ocean and terrestrial, we have cause for significant concern. We have an alarming number of reds here, which are single points of failure, reductions in funding that have already occurred. We have a significant number of concerns about specific components of the observing system. This is not a healthy observing system. This is an observing system under considerable threat and strain. So that's the first part. I'm going to switch gears now and talk about it's not just observations that matter. If we don't have your World Meteorological Organizations, your WCRPs, your GCOSs, these things that ensure the long-term sustainability of mechanisms on data sharing, data exploitation, that manage things like essential climate variables, then we're in trouble. So what does GCOS do? GCOS is best known for its ECVs, but it also reports into UNFCCC and the Earth Information Day. It creates three marquee products: the status report, an implementation plan, and ECV requirements that drive fundamental planning decisions of satellite agencies and in situ people. It drives fundamentally KPIs and funding decisions of ESA in the Climate Change Initiative, of C3S and of other activities. It maintains networks. GCOS does a lot. But GCOS is in trouble. We will not exist as a program if we do not have a functioning secretariat, and on our current financial trajectory, GCOS will shutter at the end of 2027. That is not being overly dramatic. We have run the financial numbers. We cannot continue GCOS beyond 2027. It's a stark reality right now, unless someone comes in with money. So what would coming in with money look like? Well, you could go, well, let's make good the recent US shortfall, and let's be honest, it is a US funding shortfall to the Secretariat. And what would that look like? Well, you could have basic panel support. We could do minimal work on the cycles. We could try and interact minimally with other programs. We'd produce a status report, an IP and ECV requirements, but they would be largely inward-looking. We would continue to maintain ECVs. We'd continue to do some work in networks, and we'd attend COP. It's kind of a minimal ambition. It keeps GCOS ticking over, but it's not doing everything that we should have GCOS be doing. So second support option would be to return to late 2010 support. So option one is probably a few 100,000 a year. Option two is probably an extra $1 million a year. It increases the size of the Secretariat. We can provide enhanced panel support, which means the panels can be more effective. We can do periodic cycles assessment for water, for energy, and better support the global carbon project. We can work more with more people. We can do regional and national engagement. We can have greater consultation and engagement and user involvement in creating the status report, the IP, the ECV requirements. We can do more on networks. We can do periodic active reporting on the observing system to UNFCCC. Option 3 that we have is a return to the heydays level of support. When GCOS was shiny and new, the shiny new bauble on the Christmas tree, not the dusty one that Iran wants to forget, we had about 10 or 15 members of Secretariat. And with that, you could do so much. We could do sustained panel support. We could do regular cycles assessments. So every year we could produce an energy cycle status report, a water cycle status report. We could run conferences and workshops. We could have sustained user engagement on key aspects of the GCOS program. You could run regional and national engagement support. We could think about impact of AI on applications, observations for adaptation. We could do annual reporting on the health of the observing system to UNFCCC. We could better manage the networks that we manage. That's only of the order an extra 2.5 million euros a year. Okay? So, a robust global climate observing system requires strong and dedicated coordination. I was making the case for GCOS. I could equally have made the case for WMO, WCRP, these other ones. They are all under strain. We have to start seeing these things not as a free service, but as a subscription service. And it shouldn't be going from a single point of failure of America to a single point of failure of Europe. We need to make the case multilaterally that we need to support these programs because they underpin everything we do at climate services here in Europe, but elsewhere in the world as well. Sustained observations require strong, dedicated, and sustained coordination. A small investment in GCOS leverages hundreds of experts to do their work, and we have reached fundamentally an inflection point, and I'm asking you, do you want to live in a world without these coordination mechanisms? If you don't, then you must start advocating with the people with the deep pockets to fund GCOS, WMO, and others. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Peter. We really wanted to close on a positive, and I think you helped deliver on that.
I definitely made everyone feel warm and fuzzy inside.
No, but it's good. It's good. Thank you. Also, the basketing exercise, I think it was very well done. But one of the points you made for me is particularly important, that you made a case for multilateralism. So it's not, we don't want to go from single point of failure in the US to a single point of failure in Europe. So on that respect, what do you think we should be doing?
Well, that doesn't mean Europe abdicating a leadership position. But Europe should be saying, we're going in to support, where are you? We should be saying, and we'll be going to, for example, something that Copernicus will participate in at Substa in a couple of weeks' time, where we will be making broadly this case in an informal meeting at Substa. Because we do need that multilateralism. Europe has to play its part. And Europe can and must play its part, but Europe must bring others along, which means making the case that this is really a global good and that everyone should be contributing.
Let's see if there is an instant question from the floor. One here.
Yes, it might come.
Thank you, Peter, for the attention call, which I really believe is needed. I don't know how we can be in a situation where we are discussing that we need coordination, we need to add together joint investment plans, but at the same time, when we have an organism that is doing that work for the whole world and with an amount of resources that is this low in comparison with many of the programs that we are seeing, we still haven't solved the situation. So my question is, would the conversation at national level at least be in the operationalization of some services, some kind of say, okay, let's institutions or services at national level, the amount of money of a national quota to sustain the activity would be very low, and the benefits are really high. So, and would maybe we have some margin to try to do so? What are your thoughts on that?
So yeah, if every country pro rata put in an appropriate amount relative to its GDP or its population, every country would be putting in very little. And we do have the GCOS Trust Fund, which can accept any amount of funding and can accept funding with different conditionality. It's for the panel, or it's for this, or it's for that. So we have the capability within the GCOS program, but we have been very, very poor at actually making the case. And this is perhaps, it has got so desperate now for the GCOS program that we are actively simply making the case that yes, it could be very small contributions from a very large number of people, and that would be more secure, because if any one country decided no, that is not catastrophic. The fact is that not just GCOS, WCRP is also in 50% cut, WMO 25% cut, because the US has stopped putting in. For too long we have survived on the largesse of the US, both for the coordination mechanisms for our observing programs and also, sadly, for many of our space-based and ocean-based observing programs. And we have a real reality check, and it is the moment to step up to the plate. Not just Europe stepping up to the plate, but everyone who has a stake in this, which is everyone who lives on this little pale blue planet in deepest, darkest space.
Fantastic. That's a very nice way of closing. Thank you very much. Thank you. Also, the next speaker doesn't really require an introduction, because I think has been featuring in every single GA from the very beginning, is Hugo Zunker from DigiDefis. And in a sense, I think after this introduction, there is potentially, I'm an optimist, I look at the glass half full, an opportunity for Europe as well as a risk. We have seen the US stepping back in many of the programs. Europe has not. We have still one of the most ambitious satellite and Earth observation program in the world. So really looking forward to hearing from you about the next phase. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Carlo, very much. Yes, interesting presentation, Peter. I couldn't help checking my pockets immediately. Okay, no, seriously, you know, we are in a dialogue. Where are you? Cannot see anyone. And okay, we will see where we end up with this. Now, I'm supposed here to talk about the future of the Copernicus Climate Change Service. And, well, that seems to suggest to talk a bit about the far future, but I will start with saying, okay, we are currently still implementing one phase of the Copernicus program that runs up to 2027 or even half of 2028. And I would like to come back to a couple of elements we heard during this GA already. So we heard about user-centric, we heard about co-design, and so on. We had this very interesting talk from Chris, the brain guy, as well. So I found fascinating. I recognized my brain in many of the things that you said. And so that can summarize in the request again, and we had that since a couple of years, so that these C3S is expected to produce as well products that are policy ready. And I know this term that made the skin crawl of all of you. because what does it mean and how do we do that? But this is really, it's really important to be heard and to get the message across. No? What has been a huge success recently in the Copernicus program is in these national collaboration activities. We heard a lot about that already. And so here clearly I would say I would encourage you to further strengthen this aspect. And I think the start is already extremely promising. So I was really pleased with what we saw. And I can just say, please continue, carry on this path, and it's very good. The member states are do very much appreciate this, what we do there, and I think it's important. And we had a discussion with another service that ECMWF happens to implement. And their member states appreciate a lot, in particular, that these NCP activities were kind of, as well, kind of mainstreamed. So it's not, we do this and that, and oh yes, we do as well this NCP thingy. So, but that this NCP is really kind of integrated in the other workflows as well, and that was considered as very very helpful. So let me just check if I forgot anything. Yes, in general, I think it's important to increase the overall visibility and impact of our program, that we manage even better to strengthen the links with other services, other Copernicus services, with USPA, for instance, so that we can increase basically the impact we are collectively having even further. Now, I have as well started, or we have started as well, to discuss the technical content for the next MFF. So now I'm getting to the to the midterm perspective. Lots of the things we have been discussing there have been popping up here in the GA in different ways. So I think that's all very good. And a new thing we are going to have next time round is that there will be a kind of common part of these technical annexes. So what does it mean? There will be a part of the technical annexes that is common for all the services. So this means these are things where we think it will be useful that every service does it in the same way. So that can be technical things in terms of data format and I don't know, a single logon and all these type of things. So there are working groups with all the services underway to discuss this. But as well, a common approach as well on, I mentioned NCP, but as well things like what do we do with thematic hubs, which is a concept that is so far, I think, largely underused or undervalued for a number of reasons. But here we can, I think, be better and use somehow these as a channel to reach out to communities that are maybe not immediately in our respective core community. Yes, so what is Copernicus possibly looking like next time? I just this morning threw a couple of slides together, and I give credit here to my colleagues from ESA, because the first slide I'm going to show is I stole from ESA actually. Let's see if this works. Yeah. So this, we heard a lot about the direct observation prediction, or so where you use only observations to go directly to your predictions. This graph gives you the expected data volume of just the ESA-operated satellites in the next MFF. So you see the evolution. So from very left, that's what we produced collectively for Copernicus 1. The second, little bit higher bar is what we producing in the current phase. And at the very right side here, the highest bar, that is what we expect during the next 7 years. So this includes then satellites like CO2M, the expansion satellites, and so on and so forth. This means the volume of data is really expected to develop exponentially. And that's, I think, good news for some of you, maybe. If you manage such a program, it's maybe scary. So it depends which way you look at this graph, but it's clearly that the amount of data we manage, we have available, we can work with, it will dramatically increase. And that will have impact on all of the other components of the service, of Copernicus as well. So that's something really to keep in mind. Okay, just very briefly here. So here you see the satellites that we are operating. You see as well that many of these satellites are now going to be followed by a second generation or next generation, where the definition and development phases have just started, partly. And on the very right column, you see all the extension missions that are expected somehow to be launched around starting in 28 and then over the next following years there. So among which is, for instance, CO2M, for example. So I don't go into further detail here. Now for the services, so what do we expect there? I think the good news is that basically we don't expect any significant change in the structure of these service components, meaning there will be continue to be these 6 services for the environmental part, for the emergency management, and for the, I would say, civil security. The only impact can be from this new Earth observation governmental service. There may be some impact on the security service, but I think for you that is pretty much irrelevant at the moment. So I mentioned already what are the drivers to evolve the service component. I mentioned already here the need to be policy-driven, to contributing to policies, Green Deal, preparedness even more now. As well, you could mention strategic independence, so build preferably on European resources and so on and so forth. The possibility to be ready to scale up products, that's what we need to think more, because that doesn't mean that we fund all these things ourselves, but we need to find a way to maybe scale up products and have the scale up being contributed to by the other policy or by the customer or client policy, DG, for instance. Clearly, use of digital capacities here. I go quickly. Artificial intelligence was mentioned again and again. Here, cloud-based resources, high-performance computing, all these are important technical developments, which, of course, we will need to integrate for the benefit of the service. There is then this, what is here still called Copernicus data space. Basically means a kind to work further what we have started with Wikio, for instance, to work further on a kind of federation of all the data that we are producing as a program, being a space component, being a service component, and to make this data available in a way that it is really accessible in the same way accessible. Clearly, one important aspect here is as well that it's agent ready. That was mentioned as well somewhere here. So more and more maybe in 1.5 milliseconds, some algorithm will decide if your source is at all presented to a human user or not. No? So, and that depends maybe not on a glossy layout of your cover page and nice use cases or so. That depends if the resource files are there that are enabling the agent to search for things, that the PDF can be searched, PDF documentation can be searched by this agent, and so on and so forth. You know better than me what that brings with you. So skip the governmental service here. That's none of for today. It's none of our business. So as anticipated, I overran already, Carlo. So I want briefly to say a couple of words for the regulatory framework for the next period. So we will be part of what's called the European Competitiveness Fund. You see there, I hope one can read that. So there are four. If you look to the center right part here, there are four areas: clean transition, industrial decarbonization. There's health, biotech, agriculture, and biotechnology. There's digital leadership, so that's where our colleagues from DG Connect are sitting with digital twins and so all this technology we mentioned before. And then there's, on the right, there is a window area, resilience, security, defense, industry, and space. Which is totally budgeted here with 125 billion, plus a certain share of the 11 below. You can see that this is the most important window in the whole exercise. So in total, this fund will have 234 billion and is closely associated with another program, that's the Horizon program indeed, so which is 175 billion. So that brings us to 400-something billion for innovation, technology, competitiveness, and all that. And within this context, we have to we are placed where I just explained that. No? So this, as usual. This is the law that is giving us these funds is currently in the legislative procedure. So there has been a proposal from the Commission mid last year, so roughly a year ago, and so now it's under discussion with the Council working group, being the member states, which say, yes, we should do this, we should do that, we should include this. This is too expensive, and so on and so forth. So that's a normal process at this stage. In parallel, there's it's read by the European Parliament, notably the ITRE committee, so which is in charge for technology and among others as well for space. And so this will conclude. Maybe by end of the year, they should establish their position, and then next year there will be a consensus hopefully found as part of this so-called trilogue process. In terms of timeline and in terms of what happens there is very much out of our hands. As you see, we are now one part in a much bigger framework. And so still the timing of all these things will determine as well, of course, how quickly, how fast, or how late we will be in a position again to have then a work program, a commitment, and all the necessary steps that we have before signing indeed for the next 7 years. So I stop here. I think I apologize for having overrun, and yeah, leave it as that for the moment. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And very useful to have numbers, and it was very full of information, also good for me. I'm trying to learn German as part of my relocation to Bonn. And Erweiterung Missionen, I think, was a fantastic word I will add to my vocabulary from now on. I don't know if there is any immediate question for Hugo. Otherwise, Hugo will join us on stage later, so maybe we can have it there. I don't see immediate hands up, meaning that we can possibly continue. So in looking at the evolution of the service, we decided first to look at our bigger brothers and sisters, starting from ESA and EUMETSAT. So I would like to invite our next speaker. I don't see Clément, but he should be in the room. There you are. Clément Albergel from ESA, another very known face to us here at C3S, thanks to our collaboration. Clément, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Carlos. So while waiting for the slides to appear, I might maybe introduce myself quickly. My name is Clément. I'm a section head for actionable climate information at the European Space Agency. There it is. I lead the team implementing ESA's climate change initiative. I will talk about this activity and how we work together with operational climate services. I usually start a lot of my presentation talking about the triple planetary crisis: climate change, biodiversity loss, the issue of pollution. The great thing about presenting here at the C3S General Assembly is that I don't have to convince you that this is real, that this is a bad thing, and that our activities are linked with that. Things are not looking great, but I'm convinced that the international community can still put their head together to stabilize the evolution of our future climate. But to take decisions on how to adapt to climate change, how to mitigate the impact of our changing climate, the international community needs systematic observation of the climate system. That's what we are talking about, and that puts the role of space agencies, of the European Space Agency and its member states, all of us, in the spotlight when it comes to climate and climate action. Satellite Earth observation missions have the unique capability of observing the Earth everywhere, all the time, providing continuity in measurement. At the European Space Agency, we've been dedicated to observing the Earth ever since the launch of our first weather satellite back in the 70s. And on this slide, maybe it's a bit small, you have all the missions we have developed or are preparing in the main lines of activity we have. You know science, the Earth Explorer, making sure that Europe stays at the top of technology. We have meteorology, operational satellites used every day to forecast the weather. And in the middle, I want to say, between science and operation, you have the Copernicus program of the European Union and its dedicated fleet of satellites, the Sentinels. We also support commercial missions, and we assist member states in their national missions. Last year was a year of successful launches. A bit of everything, really. An Earth Explorer, biomass, two weather satellite, MTGS1 and METOP-SG, sorry, two Sentinel activity, two products, and some national and commercial mission. We hope the same for 2026. We are preparing for the launch of two weather satellites this summer, and there will be another Sentinel satellite and an Earth Explorer Flex. So we have data. We will continue to have data. How does it link to climate? We've been providing research and development and pre-operational development to maximize the value of information from European satellite infrastructure and international partner space agencies to support operational climate services. Since 2010, ESA has launched its climate change initiative that is a direct response to the needs from the international community for systematic observation of the climate system. The objective of CCI is it's a research and development program coordinated amongst our member states. The main objective is to develop this global scale, long-term satellite-derived key component of the climate system. You will have recognized the essential climate variable as discussed, for example, by Peter earlier today. Out of this list of 55 essential climate variables, 2/3 can benefit directly from satellite Earth observation, and that's the one we are focusing on. We develop them, the one on these slides, by putting together, by combining 40 years of ESA Earth Observation Archive, and also combining those data with information from what we call third-party missions that are not owned or operated by ESA, and operational satellites, such as from the Sentinel. The climate quality data we produce are a major contribution to the evidence base that we use to understand climate change and ultimately, hopefully, drive international action. This figure summarizes our activity. If I go from that corner, the climate data record we support make it possible to assess the state of the climate, so we know where we stand. We work with the modeling community. Since 2022, we are hosting the World Climate Research Program, WCRP, CEMIP office at EXAT in the UK, and since this year, we'll do the same with the World Climate Research Program Cordex initiative. We work with them, so we know where we are heading to, and we can provide early warning of changes, and most pressing, the transparent information, unrestricted by border, that is needed to assess the collective progress made towards achieving the goal of the Paris Agreement for climate. We support the Paris Agreement, in particular its global stocktake, and we contribute to provide a crucial line of evidence for informed decision-making. In the past 3 years, we developed a lot of activities. We had additional essential work around essential climate variables. We developed scientific activity across ECVs, and hence our work interfacing observing and modeling community, work that Earth observation can do for tipping element, climate change as a driver of biodiversity change, understand the impact of climate change on cities, on health. We worked on adaptation. You've presented one of those projects this morning, Joanna. We worked also on solar radiation modification in partnership with DG Klima, and also we developed a climate campaign. We don't have one satellite that observed all the variables for the past 50 years, so we have a lot of work to do. If I take, for example, the soil moisture essential climate variable, to have a global scale data set from 1979 to the present day, we have to put together to harmonize data from more than 17 satellites. They are represented here. This data set was mature enough, the research and development was mature enough, so it could be transferred operationally to C3S that has been doing the operationalization of this data set for a few years already. Another example is above ground biomass. We've recently released version 7 of our data set, map of above ground biomass for 2005 to 2012, and then 2015 to 2024. We are working before 2015 with ALOS Pulsar, Envisat ASA, ALOS 2, Pulsar 2, and Sentinel-1 data with a special collaboration processing with our colleague from the Japanese Space Agency, JAXA. And since this year, C3S has put a contract in place with a similar consortium to continue the year-by-year operationalization of the data. Of course, we continue to provide research and development. We are trying to look backward to try to ingest new satellite from ERS-1, ERS-2, GERS, and we are also preparing for the integration of the Biomass Earth Explorer and NISA data. So this partnership, this collaboration with operational climate services continue. Another example is fire, burn area. The work that has been done in the fire CCI activity has been transferred to operation. The flagship product was burn area using MODIS. MODIS is more and more going towards its end, so we had to replace MODIS by Sentinel-3. Now we even do a global fire burn area product using Sentinel-2 at 20 meters spatial resolution. And because we were in position to fund a reprocessing of MODIS Sentinel-3 data set to try to harmonize the time series, we've developed it, and it is now being brokered to C3S. Reprocessing is another way we work with C3S. I could have mentioned a lot of other examples. I see my colleague from the Snow CCI here, Greenhouse Gas CCI as well. Generally speaking, the research and development from 25 CCI projects has been taken up by operational services. As you can see here, you've got the GCOS ECVs in the middle, the CCI project on the left, and the operational services on the right. In red, it's about C3S, and you can see that we are mostly working with C3S, but also CAMS, the Marine Service, as well as the satellite application facilities of EUMETSAT. Most recently, we had the above ground biomass project and the sea surface salinity entering operation at C3S. Now, we will continue. We are currently working on the evolution of the essential climate variable framework at ESA, and we are taking into account the evolution of the requirement of major drivers from the International Climate Network, GCOS, of course, IPCC, UNFCCC, the link with the climate modeling community, and of course, we need to support what the operational climate services want: C3S, CAM, CMEM, CGLS, EUMETSAT, as well as national climate services. So we are integrating all of that in our next invitation to tender that hopefully we will manage to have out in end of August, September, more likely. And we would like to develop a project covering all those lines of activity for 3 years, starting next year. Again, trying to take into account the need from operational climate services. And I think that's what I wanted to say. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Clément, for the excellent presentation. There is time for one or quick question, if there is from the audience. You've been extremely clear. Thank you, Clément. Okay, we continue still on the upstream with our colleague from EUMETSAT, and is a joint effort from Lieven by the Kerke and our very own Jörg Schulz, that you've already seen on the first day. So Jörg will present perspective of EUMETSAT on the evolution of C3S. Jörg, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you, Carlos. So it's about 2 days ago when I learned that I'm going to give that presentation, and this included also to make that presentation. So that is, but I hope it's still a bit to the point. I will not cover everything that has to do with Copernicus, but we will concentrate a little bit on what might be so some future lines with C3S. But of course, we need to talk always about the space segment, and I think Clément has shown you the full breadth of it. And I just like to highlight here is what you see here is basically all the satellites are operated by EUMETSAT, and the implementation of the Copernicus space segment is a shared responsibility between ESA and EUMETSAT. So EUMETSAT is actually operating basically Sentinel 3, 4, 5, 6 CO2M elements of future satellites you will see in the next slide. And in reflection of Peter's talk, it is one thing that creates the backbone, the continuity in the moment and in the past has ever been the weather missions. Now the things that break away are all based on research missions that are short-lived, and things like a NASA decadal survey have no element like continuity. You know? So we talked about that a few years ago. There's a very nice report that was thought to unite the three agencies in the US, NASA, NOAA, and USGS, to invest more in continuity and also make the decadal survey having continuity elements. But the government change has just prevented this to become life. If you want to enter that cycle, and our operational weather satellites, which are also a backbone for climate monitoring, these cycles are very long, because such a program is just made for 20 years, and the discussions about what follows after MESA third generation have already started. If you miss that point in the next 12 months, 24 months, no chance for the next 20 years. So this is why your talk is, of course, timely, and one needs to think about what is actually affordable of this. So I just wanted to say that, but you have our support, and as Hugo, we also consider to maybe give you a little more money. So that is that's under consideration, and Europe, I think, has adopted the ECV framework, and that's why we are really following. There are other parts in the world that have not really adopted the ECV framework, and that makes it more difficult. So we need to explain better, in particular to Asia, what the benefits of this are still. No? So we can help you with that, but it's a thick bore to drill through, believe me. So these are the current satellites where we draw lots of data from it, and you see some new capabilities here. So that's MTG. It has an imager and a lightning imager, and what you see here is a scale of observation that comes even from the operational. Oops, I think the movie is not starting. I don't know, how can I start that movie? I don't know. No, we should start it automatically. But you see some fires that ignite, and these fires have led actually to severe convection that has created torrent rain in the mountains to the east. And you can see this also with very wide lightning. And this is a scale at kilometers where you can really see these processes and how they interact. And we saw the taxonomy for the risk with the bank, so there were storms and heat related, and this has basically everything in it what you need for monitoring this. So the evolution of the Copernicus space segment at EUMETSAT, so you see continuation in the Sentinel-3C, so as Hugo has said, with everything is in orange, are new developments, and we're very much engaged in about, I think, 2/3 of the upcoming Copernicus missions, which are partly developed in terms of ground segment, algorithms, products, at EUMETSAT, and we also run things like the altimeter mission Sentinel-6 MFB, and there will be also a next generation which is under debate. There were issues because this was a joint mission with NOAA, NASA, ESA, and EUMETSAT, and geopolitics are really a threat for these kind of corporations. So we need to find ways to overcome that. And then you see 4 and 5, the atmospheric chemistry Sentinels are passengers on our operational programs. Hugo has started data volume. I had the same plot, so you could have stolen that from me. So you see on the left the instruments operated by EUMETSAT. So I think in 2028, 2030, we have about 40 instruments from the Copernicus space segment that we operate. And this creates basically an increased factor of 5 up to 2030s. But as I showed you 2 days ago on the GeoRing, so combining these into discrete gridded data sets has a potential to really reduce the data volume to 20-30% of the original, which makes it probably better digestible without losing information, actually. Some keystones, it's on climate, but it's not necessarily C3S, it's rather CAMS, is of course the CO2M constellation that is just being developed. So we will miss the global stocktake in 28. This is a bit old slide I grabbed, but there will be further global stocktakes. And this is the input to the system, as you see in the lower right, that is also run by ECMWF and the CAMS service that will deliver these emission estimates in the end for this process. And this is, but this is the backbone of that. And this is under development, and the first launch will be probably in 1.5 years, I think. Okay, other things, Sentinel-3 has one prominent instrument, the SLSTR, which is an imager in IR and visible, and there have been a lot of meteorological products which are very useful for climate monitoring. You saw me talking about AMVs, of course you can do this also with Sentinel-3. Aerosol optical depth, there is a lot of instruments, including SLSTR, where we have now developed a long time series, which can be continued backwards with MODIS, for example, and the radiance first, and then retrieval. And of course, things like fire radiative power is also very interesting, and that has already found its way in the emergency service, the real-time product, but we can, of course, as for burned area in ESA, building that into a climatology of fire radiative power, and we will do that. Sea level, so we operate many of these instruments that are new, like JSON-3 or the S6. We have access to SARAL, and so this will be reconsidered as well, because there are components that lead to large errors still in this very accurate measurements on the sea level, but there's still things like the wet delay, which depends on the microwave radiometers of these instruments, and we actually plan to recalibrate all those radiometers, because we have activities with our own microwave imaging, and so we will bring them all together. We have done a lot of sounding data sets in this phase for C3S, but we'll do the same on the imaging data sets to make that as complete as possible, including Japanese data, US data, and so forth. We have already, for all the missions that we operate, a mandatory built-in reprocessing activity systematically to consolidate the quality of measurements. So that's in the current contribution agreement to the EC already. But this is not turning this into a climate data record, because it just does products and level 1 consolidation reprocessings of the missions we operate. But there are useful targets. So one, of course, is that everything that has to do with SLSTR and ALCHI in radians can be put back to 2000 using integrating with this MODIS and also the VIRS instrument. And that is something we certainly consider, and we can see for what this is useful. I think it could be useful for reanalyses. It could produce products for validating interfaces and a couple of reanalyses. It could be very good also for DOPS and etc. So this is a multi-purpose data record in radiant space that could be utilized, and this with the microwave radiometers I just explained. So in summary, so it is clear that EUMETSAT will, together with ESA, evolve the Copernicus space segment operations and also the product portfolio. And there are a lot of discussions among the so-called 4 E's, so ESA, EUMETSAT, ECMWF, and the EC, to optimize also the ECV landscape a bit, because you can still overlap in parameters. So we need to see how we join forces and don't waste too much energy. But for the Copernicus space segment, so we will integrate that with other measurements and towards climate data records. That's a firm plan. We try to support all Copernicus services, so we also try to identify commonalities and needs from the land service, ocean surface, CAMS, C3S, so everything, the 4 that Hugo had also being joined, so that we make these data useful for all. No? And the requirements are not the same, but there's a lot of commonality actually in those, and we have conversations about that. No? You are at our heart, because this is probably the most long-standing collaboration that we have in terms of the services. Combining sensor data into longest possible harmonized time series is a focus for EUMETSAT, and this includes basically all data we can get our hands on, from historical but also to actual. And this has also the good result that many US data get also archived in Europe, and this is actually good. You may have heard about the flooding in Asheville, North Carolina, where the NOAA Center is, that hosts a lot of data. There was pretty probability for data loss, and they had also hold all the US geostationary data, so we have transferred those already, and they are all in our archive, and the real raw data, so that's a level 0 stuff that you can work out everything. So we looked at also for other data. Combination quality control, harmonized data at radiance level and discrete grids. We will expand the georing with polar orbiter data, so that this gets a global field of those data, and that should ease use, and also is reducing data volume for the different applications. And that has the view also on the machine learning to make that training maybe a little less GPUs to do that if you have slightly smaller volumes. The SAF products, so Clément has mentioned those. There are developments in the list of ESA. What you saw probably missing is this big topic of precipitation. So the SAFs have started, they do in 5-year phases, and they will start another one in early next year. And we had a big review of their proposals, and there will be now more joint precipitation activities between the climate monitoring SAF, the hydrology SAF, and also a little bit of the nowcasting to really develop algorithms. And the aim of that is potentially also to combine with surface radar to get precipitation data to a scale where you can also work on extremes. And that means rather things like 10-minute, 1 kilometer, 2 kilometer resolutions where you can do that. So surface radar, you are limited in Europe, which is probably a focus for Copernicus anyway, but also over the United States and other parts of the world, and where you can do the satellite only over the oceans, it is a bit easier radiometrically. And then the last point is we also think about, and we have started that with the storms, the last slide I showed you 2 days ago, we do these climate data records, and they are mostly of global character, so they produce big amounts of data like the reanalysis outputs, so very similar. But we also go in the direction of event-oriented databases. So we single out a big convection database, and the advantage of that is you can combine things with precipitation lightning at a system base, and then you can use this for extreme event analysis, because you have just the extremes already isolated. You can do single event process studies with the data, as I showed you in the slide of the capability of the FCI. And you can also still do climate change analysis and statistics over larger scales. So it still contains a global coverage, but it only covers data that are relevant for the question. So that is also a way. And I had last night at the dinner, a nice discussion that was about the similar things on algae blooms. And this is also, there goes also in ocean parameters where you could apply that. They could also become labeled training data, so it's a multi-purpose attempt. So broadly the direction, what we fund from what, we will need to see. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jörg, and thank you for compressing so much information in just a few slides. Quick question for Jörg. I mean, clearly our friends of the upstream are much better in clarity than we are. I think you have been very clear. Thank you, Jörg. So we can move directly into the panel discussion. So this is the last panel discussion of the last session, and we are running slightly late, but just a touch. So I think we are doing pretty okay. And for this last discussion on the evolution of the service, I would like actually to call the other services to join us in. Online, we will have Laurence Raoul, who from ECNWF. Hello, Laurence, leading on comms. We'll have Pierre-Yves Letaron from Mercator Océan, leading on the marine service, and we will also have Peter Salomon. Hello, Peter, from the JSC on the emergency management. And here on stage, I would like to invite Josué Donesar, who comes from the EEA for the land service, and Hugo, if you want to join us again here back on stage to follow on. Yeah, please. So for the three of you who are online, we see you because we have a monitor, but you're also very big behind our back, so the room can see you as well as us. And the idea was to acknowledge the fact that this is an ecosystem. It's an ecosystem of different services working together. And it's an ecosystem that has been structured very much along thematic lines. So we have the ocean service, we have the atmosphere service, we have the land service, and then we have the emergency management and the climate change that are a bit cross-cutting. I think this setting actually served us well, has been very successful for C3S, but for all services. But it's also true that at times has made the life of the user a bit more challenging. There is some level of fragmentation, there are some uncertainties. So maybe just to start the conversation, and possibly we can start, well, maybe we can start online and then we move to the on-site. The question is, where do you see the greatest scope in the next phase to reduce this fragmentation or avoid duplication and being even more clear to the user? So on my screen, Pierre-Yves, you are the one on the left. So maybe we can start from you, and then we move to Peter and Laurence.
Okay. Thank you very much, Carlo. I'm very pleased to be here with you and share our views for Copernicus services. So as you explained, I mean, we are all working in a Copernicus ecosystem, and we are really working hard on the collaboration between the services. So on your question, I think it's important to first remind where we are. I mean, we are really working closely together as within the Copernicus ecosystem. So for Copernicus Marine, so we are working, Mercator is working closely with ECMWF to make the link between C3S and Copernicus Marine Service. So we made some evolution during this Copernicus 2 and with this implementation of ocean ECV processing for C3S and for ECMWF with our Copernicus Marine contractor. This is really a right evolution to improve the interfaces. We are also collaborating on what we do with the Ocean State Report and what you do on European State of Climate, making sure that we are aligning messages and so on. I think in the future, I mean, of course, I mean, we are doing well, I would say. We can improve, for sure. That's really, and there are different ways to do it. And that's, as you explained also, we are working on it. I mean, that's also the presentation of Hugo to prepare the next MFF. I think one aspect which is important for climate, I mean, you explained climate is really transverse, I mean, with all Copernicus services. So we have different products available through the different services. There are possibly a way to improve this the link by making sure that products that are done specifically in a given service that are also relevant for climate aspect that could be could better inform the user. And I think given the system that we have with a cloud-based system with a climate data store, marine data store, and so on, that is rather easy just to provide information to the user. Then we need some more activity on harmonization and so on, but this is really something ongoing. So I think there is, it's also important that we work together on how to evolve the offer on what services can provide to better support climate and climate adaptation. And that's we have different activities under discussion in Copernicus Marine together with you, by the way. I can elaborate more if you want, but just for the intro. I don't want to spend too much time.
Let's do a quick round first, and then if there is time, we may come back. Peter, over to you.
Yes, thanks. Well, thanks first, Kabi, for the invitation. And well, as you said already, I mean the climate change and the emergency management service are a bit of a are cross-cutting services in particular. But I mean, not only cross-cutting with the other four services, but actually SEMS and C3S are quite tightly linked. I mean, climate change adaptation and disaster risk reduction, we all know it's clear that there are obvious links there. And a little bit like Pierre-Yves already said, I mean, we have already quite a number of strong connections. We build, for example, our flood and drought outlooks also using your seasonal predictions from C3S. The European State of the Climate includes data from the Emergency Management Service. So I think we have come a long way, but I think there's definitely more potential to do and work and develop more of these common products. One of the also for the next MFF, one of the challenges I see is to make sure that we have a clear and coordinated communication to our users, because it's being, as we said, some of the topics are cross-cutting. It's inevitable that our user groups are then also cross-cutting, and I'm sure there are some of our SEMS users sitting probably in the audience of the General Assembly of C3S. And so we need to have this effort on a clear and coordinated communication to ensure that the users also understand where the local expertise sits in the different services, but also where we do things together. And last but not least, I think to enable this, and this is also, I mean, in a sense what Pierre-Yves already mentioned, is we need to continue the strategic and also regular discussions that we have in between the different services and together with DEFIS to make sure that we continue building these links. So I'll stop here.
Thank you, Peter. And actually, the last point is a good hook for me, because at times we give this conversation for granted. So much so that in the first version of this panel, I didn't include CAMS at all, because Laurence and I speak almost daily. And then I realized my error and I corrected. But it's really important. Maintaining this coordination is fundamental, and it's fundamental not just for C3S and CAMS, but it's fundamental between C3S and all services. So Laurence, over to you.
Thank you, Carlo, and good morning, everyone. Yes, as you said, we interact every day about how our collaboration between so atmosphere monitoring and climate change. So obviously, what we do within CAMS is monitoring, forecasting the evolution of air pollutants and greenhouse gases, and this is greenhouse gases are the main drivers of climate change. So we've already put in place a lot of interactions between both services, but as we already said, maybe there is a room to improve further in the next phases. Maybe I would give two examples. First, you know that CAMS, one of the strengths and mandate of CAMS is a near real-time provision of information about the evolution of the atmospheric composition, so greenhouse gases concentrations, emissions, observation-based emissions. And this near real-time component sometimes is not robust enough to serve, in fact, the needs of C3S. So maybe this is something that we could investigate further, how to make it more robust and more reliable, so that it could serve also the need of the assessments that are carried out within C3S. And something that we've discussed a lot already, Carlo, is how to align our reanalysis, because there are the climate reanalysis, so ERA 5 and ERA 6 now, and there are the atmospheric composition reanalysis, so ESC4 and ESC5 soon. And we have in mind the fact that, okay, there are some parameters, variables that are common. And having this more holistic overview for the production of reanalysis data sets, this is certainly one of the main points we will focus on in the future. So two examples, but of course there are other areas that we could investigate further.
Thank you, Laurent. And it's quite interesting because the point you mentioned were also strong feedbacks from the member state. When we engage with the member state discussion, actually this coordination across services came very strongly from our user. Ursula.
Yep. Okay, it's working. I think it's there's little to add. So first, but I would like to say one thing. I think that for the next MFF, we really need to put more, at least at the land service, we are also talking about it together with the GRC, on how to put the users more in the center of the evolution of our services. And I think that without disconnecting from the users that each of the services has in the vertical component, we need to maybe work together more on the cross-cutting aspects. I think that in that sense it's very interesting, the proposal from DEFIS to have a horizontal technical annex to really, and we should also use that opportunity to really have a strategy towards that and try to also look for efficiencies, if that would make sense. Land, you could also say that it's in the vertical, but actually a lot of the things happen on land. And our hope is to also serve the other Copernicus services as much as possible, if that would make sense. I think that I was very interested, for instance, in yesterday's the agricultural service that was presented, because we are also working on agriculture as well. And I think that it is interesting, we are all serving different users, that's clear. The services have the different added values, but at least, but we should at least try to coordinate or make clear that we could learn from each other as well. I think that's the main goal. But I also think that, as I said, the users, I don't think that they will care so much on who's doing what in the future. This is not to take doubt the value of each of our services. But I think that there is a lot to learn or a lot to gain if we move more towards this horizontal type of things. And I think that at the EA, at least, we have also the experience that we have with the in situ, which is also cross-cutting. And I think that that's something that we could also learn upon.
Thank you, Sue. And maybe after this first round of interaction with the different services, a reflection from you, Hugo, from a DEFIS perspective.
Yes, thank you, Carlo. Well, I think, fortunately, many of the things have already been addressed as well by the service managers here in the room. And I think that's a good news. Clearly, we have seen a couple of examples here. If you look at the atmosphere service and the climate service, it's very naturally the link there is easily very close, because you meet Laurent in the coffee corner every second day, unless you're on mission. But I think for the other services, we will need maybe to strengthen there as well, a maybe more structured approach that they can that all the services are on the same footing in this process. No? Pierre-Yves has mentioned, I think, a lot of things that have been done or are being developed. So I think we are on a good path there. And looking where we came from maybe 10 years ago, I think we are considerably better, have grown considerably better at this. No? Clearly, we have to acknowledge as well, then when looking from the outside, if you speak with users occasionally, then often people who, I would say, where usage of Copernicus is not the core of their daily activities. If they then say, yes, well, maybe Earth observation could be somehow useful, and then they try to find something and they, that looks very, very, very complicated, and they are turned away by that. So here we, I think, collectively can still improve. So that we present our data in a common way. this common data space that we are trying to develop or will continue to develop, I would say, that should be a part of it. But clearly, for me here is important as well that the connection between the data and the data producers is not cut. No? So the expertise sits with all of you. So here as well with the other services that are here. With you here in the audience for C3S, and this connection is essential that the people can get support from and explanations from the people who made these products, and that is very important to maintain. No? Yeah.
Thank you, Hugo. I have a second question, but before getting into the second question or round of questions, I would like to briefly open the floor. If there is a pressing question there is one over there. One over there too.
Thank you. I was wondering, so very concretely, you mentioned just now the horizontal integration in terms of technical terms and also the common data space. What are the concrete plans for the next phase for harmonizing the data access or the data distribution across Copernicus?
Thank you. Actually, this is very nice because that was my next question. So we are perfectly aligned. So if you allow me, because we will get I would like really to have the opinion of the entire panel. So maybe we can go to the other question. It's not that we are not answering. We come back to that question for sure.
Thank you. Yeah, so my name is Jordan Delmar. I work for Irish Met Service, and Carla, you said at the start that it can be challenging for users. It's fragmentation. Sorry, and we spent the last 3 days listening to kind of Europe's response to climate crisis, effectively adaptation specifically, and for the majority of the 3 days, our solution or the solution has been to add more data to that problem. And I guess the reason I ask is I typically work as an intermediary between users and scientists. And I guess the point is, at what point in kind of your view do you see, or how do we shift our priority to beyond the data and to the other parts of the climate service, right? Because the climate service isn't just data. There's 4 components, as Soon mentioned yesterday, and they are decision context, ecosystem of actors, and delivery mode and evaluation. And how do we move to make them a priority? Because there's lots of data, and that can be debilitating and cause inertia and all sort of things. So how do we move to, I guess, incite action more so, and not have data as the priority?
That's a fantastic question, really interesting, and links to, for sure, to what Asun was saying, but also this morning, the discussion from Joanna, the presentation on adaptation, and the other talks we heard today. My feeling is that the response can only be a systemic response, so it's not just one actor, it's the entire society, and probably this is the reason why a closer coordination across services is so important, because we cannot afford not to coordinate and not to respond as a society. But I don't think the question is just for me. So maybe we can, if you can be extremely short in your reply, like just one point, maybe we can go the same order as before to respond to this point before moving to the data access. Pierre-Yves.
Well, very briefly, I mean, we are not dealing only with data, we're also dealing with services, I mean, linking with downstream services, providing application, providing decision tools, and that's probably something in the next phase would be even more important. I mean, in the perspective of Copernicus Marine, that's something we'll do with the Digital Twin Ocean, for instance, but really adding tools, so that downstream user can really work best with the data that we provide.
Peter.
Yeah, I'll be very short. I mean, the emergency management service key, obviously, for our work is to deliver information that is ready to be used in decision making, because that's what emergency response and disaster risk reduction is all about. So for us, clearly, and as was mentioned before, tight user interaction with the ones that do the decisions is key. And here's maybe something that and because this is it's more particular to the emergency management service, where the other services can maybe learn in that aspect a little bit also from the emergency management service. I'm sure we can learn other things from the other services, but that aspect is maybe something which is intrinsically connected to emergency response in particular.
Thank you. Laurence.
Yeah, yes, I think that this is really the strength of the services, to be able to translate those data sets into something, products, services that could be used for action and for policy support. Well, maybe we can improve a bit further. We are all working on that. But developing a more holistic approach to be able to approach in a more integrated way the environmental policies, this is maybe something that we could look at further. Yeah.
Sure.
Yes, this is something that we are also, our users are also demanding from the land service. I would like to say, I always say the same, the land service, we have a characteristic that there are so many times we see data that seems to be our data or looks like data that comes from us and that looks nice in the screen, and then our users get very confused on what should they be using. And I think that for the next MFF we also need to be very clear that Copernicus should become the trustable source. So really put the focus on being the trustable and also on our robustness and the consistency and the coherence. I think that's one of our biggest assets.
I don't know, Hugo, if you want to touch on this point as well, or do you want to jump straight into the other question?
No, maybe allow me one sentence on this one as well. I mean, here we are at the border between providing information and decision support to, I would say, nudging into certain decisions. No? So if I start to do that, then I'm in the gray area where this service should be or not be. No? That's one consideration. But so we will have to make to facilitate this process that you mentioned there. I cannot see anyone down there somewhere. But we should not predetermine the outcome. So no. Thank you.
Okay, now I have a very difficult challenge, because I have 5 minutes left in this session, and we need to go to a very, very important question, which is the data access. And I guess my thinking was very much aligned to yours, because there are certainly some pluses that are very evident of harmonizing data access, but there are also some complexity. So rapidly, and sorry to rush you, but just to be respectful of the slot we have. Pierre-Yves, how do you see the balance between the benefit of this harmonized data access and the possible challenge that comes out of it?
Okay. No, I mean, strong benefit, but we are not starting from scratch. Today we have, in particular for environmental services, we have WCAO with already an harmonized access to all products from all services. I mean, there is, of course, room for improvement, but I think this is very important that we have this harmonized access and to continue working on it. I'm just...
Very good. Peter.
Yeah, well, I mean, for the emergency management service, the harmonization of data is something that is extremely difficult and challenging for us, because we have, if you imagine, we have quite a diverse type of data. We have regularly gridded, regularly temporary data coming out of our monitoring and forecasting systems, and then we have data for the on-demand mapping, for example, which is very specific, different spatial resolution, irregular temporal frequency. And to put this all into one pot is extremely challenging. So for us, we will definitely continue working on trying to implement and respect standards. This is for us key. And then obviously machine learning ready is something that is for us also and for many still something that needs to be worked on. But yeah, I think this is for us, the common standards is for us the way to go, and to then try to integrate as much as possible the data into this harmonized data access through this street.
And as you know, I'm very supportive of this point. I think is fundamental, especially in a moment where technology is changing so rapidly. So yesterday we had a presentation from Laia Romero showing the ARCO and what ARCO can do now. And in a sense, our discussion may look obsolete in 6 months' time if we are not careful. So looking at the fundamental and data governance and standard for me is one of those, is very important. Laurence.
Yes, common standards and also facilitating, of course, the development and communication about common portals so that the user journey could be facilitated. This is something that is essential. Also regarding all the applications of our data, and also regarding the fact, and this is what Ujue mentioned, the fact that we aim at providing reference data in our respective fields. So it will be very important to ensure this consistency between our services. Yes.
Ujue.
Yes. So and following with what Pierre-Yves and Laurence were saying as well. So we need to. We should, or at least I think we have now the opportunity before the next MFF to work towards this coherency. I know I'm not leaving SEMS out because of whatever, but because I know that they have very specific casuistry. But in our case, I think we should definitely maybe agree on some sort of standards among us. And that would only work in our own benefit, in the sense of being also more relevant in the future. Because otherwise, it's true what you're saying and what we discussed yesterday. We always seem to be solving problems that we already have and not so much forward thinking. And I think that now we have the opportunity to really think forward on those things.
Thank you, sir. Hugo, you have the last word on this. In all sense.
Thank you. I think in terms of content, replying to this, I think most of the things have been said, so I don't want to repeat all that. Just maybe I would like to acknowledge that indeed there are specificities for each of our services, so these will have to be respected. That's very, very clear when we continue this work. So the idea is not clearly not to have the common pot of data to stir it around until it's completely unrecognizable soup. No, so that's definitely not the scenario we have in mind. Then, for me, whatever I would say, physical implementation of the data infrastructure below might be, but it's important that the data is discoverable and by people who are looking for data, that they can have in a harmonized way access to it, again, independent of who produced it and independent of where it may physically be sit and curated. And so in particular, again, of course, for these machine algorithms, agent access and so on. So, and if we do not manage at least these basic things, I think we lost it then for the next MFF on this one, because then other people will do it, and they will not have these trustability, or these will not provide the same level of quality than we would do. No? Yeah, but nevertheless, we would risk being washed away by that. Yeah.
And thank you actually for, I think this is a very, very important point, because what this discussion is not happening in the void, it's happening in a context where there is a fair competition on those, and there is an added value in the coordination we have. So also for that reason, I was very keen to have this discussion with all services, because it's really an ecosystem and it needs to work well together. So please join me in thanking Pierre-Yves, Pierre, Peter, Laurence, Ujue, and Hugo. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
So this actually is getting very, very close to the end. There are a couple of things that I need to do. The first one of which is, as you know, is tradition for us to give a small prize to the poster competition. So I will, actually, I don't know the result yet, so it will be a discovery for me as much as it will be for you. I'll leave the floor to Nicholas.
Yes, thanks a lot, Carlo. And thanks a lot for the plenary discussion here. I really enjoyed that. So yeah, over the last 3 days, you discussed, you talked, you listened, and you voted as well for the your most favorite poster. So here I have the results. They're very fresh from the press. And I want to ask to come on stage poster number 26, Neshat Ramani from the Politecnico di Torino, who earned 6% of the votes, with her work on climate-resilient mobility in cities. I don't see anyone coming on stage, unfortunately. That means we may have overrun, and she already left.
Yeah, we overrun a bit. We can keep it aside and
okay,
give it to them.
but it's on record, so you have the you can listen to it anyways. Then I would also ask to come on stage poster number 36 by Attila Sütó, sorry for the pronunciation, from Hungaromet, with 8% of the shares for his work on evidence-based adaptation on policymaking. Thanks a lot. And may I ask Alice to... Oh.
Yeah, over there.
Okay.
Oh, it's over here.
Ah, okay, sorry. So yeah, thanks a lot.
Oh, come on stage, come on. Applause.
Thank you.
Yeah, there's a third.
One more.
Go for it.
Okay, and then for the, we have really like a clear winner. I'm really happy about that because that was also my favorite poster. But I promise I did not manipulate the vote. So we have Platon Patlakas from WeMed Greece on his work on energy droughts in the Mediterranean with 20% of the votes. So thank you. Come, please, on stage.
Thank you. I didn't shake the head. Thank you. Very good. Thank you very much. Oh, here's another one.
Yeah. Just a very quick final announcement for the ECMWF staff who's going back today to Brussels or Bonn, and you want a taxi to the airport, please come to me. We're trying to organize everything for the UK as well, London. Okay. Thank you. So come to me. I'm here for you. Thanks.
Thank you. So this is really the end. We've done the poster. What I have left to do is just to thank you first. Thank you for coming here to Budapest. I would like also to thank the comms team, Eva, Elizabeth, Max, for the excellent work they have done. And I would like to thank particularly Francesca, who's not with us today because of personal circumstances, but who has done, as always, at the General Assembly, most of the hard work in the preparation. So thank you very much, Francesca. If you listen, we really appreciated your effort. Thanks also to the people who are in the regie there and all the technicians. Thank you for our contractor, to Alice, Jada, Alice, and yeah, so really great. Clearly, I couldn't continue this thank you message without a special mention to the people who actually put the program together in the first place. So some of you asked me how I felt about this General Assembly on day one. And maybe because I spent some time in the UK, I said, well, reasonably good. Well, that was day 1, and now we are day 3, and it's definitely good. It's been fantastic. I enjoyed this GA more than others. I really felt that the program added value and flew smoothly. So I would like really to thank Niklas and Niels for the hard work they have done. Please stand up. Okay. Last thing, I promised that I was going to announce location and date of the next GA, and so that's what I'm going to do. I really look forward to see each and every one of you next year, last week of May, in the beautiful city of Rome in Italy. So, with that, I officially wrap up this GA. Thank you very much for being here, and I'm looking forward to seeing you next year. Bye-bye.